What would happen if Deku had the strongest fire quirk? Let's find out. But before we start, please hit the subscribe button, like the video if you like this story. Also consider sharing this with your friends, this really helps. Let's start. Their third day of class started with an unexpected and, for most, rather unwelcome, surprise. The media had discovered that All Might was teaching at UA, and had come in force to investigate. The reporters couldn't actually get into UA without the school's permission, so they parked themselves outside by the door, and interviewed everyone they could with single-minded ferocity. Izuku jumped when he was singled out by a woman who was probably in her mid-20s. What kind of lessons does All Might teach? The Izuku recoiled from the mic that was practically shoved in his face. I am. Geez, everyone's so noisy, Katsuki grumbled, grabbing Izuku by the back of his collar, and dragging him along to the school. The reporter flashed towards him instead. What do you think of All Might? Wait, aren't you that kid from the sludge villain incident? A vein bulged in Katsuki's forehead, prompting a snarl. F off. From what Izuku could see as he let Katsuki drag him away from the chaos, Tenya was taking the whole interview thing pretty well, too well, in fact. The reporter questioning him looked annoyed by his long-winded and over-the-top answers. Elsewhere, another reporter had cornered a group consisting of Ichako, Tsuyu, Kyuka, and Mina, all four of which looked more than a little eager to get the hell out of there. They were all saved when Mr. Aizawa showed up, his exhausted and scruffy appearance causing many of the cameramen to cut the feed almost instantly. The guy just wasn't suited to being on the news. All Might is off duty at the moment. You are disturbing our students and the classes here, Aizawa told them bluntly, waving his hand as if to shoo them away. I need to ask you to politely vacate the premises. He glanced at his students, who eagerly ran over to him and then into the school, before turning away from the reporters. It nearly started an uproar of frustrated and unsatisfied questions. The reporter who had interrogated Izuku and Katsuki puffed up her cheek angrily. Geez, just a little time is enough. Come on, send All Might out. No, wait. An older reporter shouted as she walked too close to the entrance gate. With a loud slamming of metal, the gate crashed shut, providing several layers of impenetrable steel between the reporters and the school. The woman who had tripped the sensor fell on her rear in shock. It's the UA barrier, the reporter who had tried to warn her explained with a sigh. That's what we call it, anyways. Without a staff or student ID, the doors snapped shut automatically. There are even sensors all over the campus on the off chance someone actually breaks in. That's so lame. She retorted, rising back to her feet and dusting herself off. Why are they going so far to keep us out? They haven't even given us a cheap lie or some boring information to report. While the media raged in front of the barred gate, a man dressed in a long, black-sleeve hoodie and worn-out pants behind them watched the scene in silence. Tired-looking red eyes gazed at the school with malevolence. Pick a class president, Aizawa told them the moment everyone had settled in their seats. I don't care how you decide it, just get it done before the period is up. We don't have much to discuss in homeroom today. Most of what we'll be doing is going to be handled during hero studies later. Instantly, pretty much the whole class was up and clamoring for themselves to be president. Even Izuku wouldn't deny he was kind of interested in the idea, but he was really nervous about it, as well. Enough. Tenya suddenly interrupted. This is no small decision that can be made just because you want to. The presidency is a sacred office that only the chosen may find themselves tasked with. Therefore, it should be decided by a democratic vote. He says with his hand raised up as high as the rest of us, Mina finished, grinning at the sight of the young man with his back ramrod straight, and his hand held high in the air. Tsuyu held a finger to her chin. It's a bit early to have developed any trust in each other, isn't it? Everyone will probably just vote for themselves. Is it not why the person who earns multiple votes will be truly worthy of the task? Tenya demanded. If their charisma is such that they can earn the trust of many this early amongst class relations, they must possess the qualities worthy of class president. Kyuka sighed and leaned back in her seat. Sure, why not? Let's vote, guys. Robot isn't going to let up on us anytime soon if we don't. The votes were made anonymously so no one could be singled out for their vote, but by the end of the next 10 minutes, all the votes were tallied and written up on the blackboard. The scores were as such. Izuku Midoriya, 5 votes. Momoya Yorozu, 3 votes. Katsuki Bakugo, 2 votes. Ejiro Kirishima, 1. Masao Jiro, 1. Minoru Mineta, 1. Koji Kuda, 1. Eizu Shoji, 1. Denki Kaminari, 1. Hantasero, 1. Fumikage Tokoyami, 1. Akito Sato, 1. Yuga Aoyama, 1. Needless to say, Izuku was a little happy, extremely shocked, and absolutely terrified from the results. I got 5 votes out. Izuku, half squeaked, half screamed. Who the hell voted for you? Katsuki demanded, flabbergasted. Hanta looked at the blonde teen with a stunned look. More like who the hell voted for you of all people. What's that supposed to mean? Kyuka made a show of plugging one of her earphone jacks into her phone and played some music, ignoring the rest of the class. I'm only doing something nice for him this once because he kicked Minoru's ass yesterday and won the exercise for us. I'm still kind of glad he didn't win, though. In the back of the classroom, Ichako was whistling innocently as she studied the wall. It'd probably be really scary if Katsuki found out I voted for Izuku. He's why nerdy and shy, but he lined up that kick for Katsuki so perfectly yesterday that I don't care. Mina grinned to herself as she watched Izuku flail in a panic. I'd rather vote for someone who looks out for us and isn't a D+, he's kinda cute. I couldn't decide between voting for Momo or Izuku, so I just flipped a coin, Sue thought. She was satisfied with the results since they were both president and vice president. Eyes, why didn't you vote for me? Minoru whined to his fellow males. Didn't you hear my policies for all the girls to expose at least 30 centimeters of thigh? Yeah, and we also heard you hit the wall yesterday when Katsuki punted you like 1,000 yards from across campus. Mashura sweat dropped. No thank you, I choose life. Also, that's disgusting, Rikido added. No one wants that. Learn some common decency before you try to do something like become class president, Fumikage told him. Minoru waved his fists to the air desperately. All of you are so gay. And they're way smarter than your dumbass. Minoru felt death itself touch him as Katsuki Bakugo's hand lay itself upon his shoulder with false kindness. I haven't had to murder a PAL twice before, but I wonder how far I could blast you from here. We're on the 3rd floor, and there are fewer obstacles on the way to whatever level of hell you land in this time. Should I try it? Why you wouldn't dare, Minoru squeaked, looking over his shoulder and nearly pissing himself at the monstrous grin on Katsuki's face. You got detention for it last time. And it was worth every second, Katsuki cackled, his eyes becoming almost deranged. The hand on Minoru's shoulder made a few tiny explosions, causing the short teen to squeal in panic. Go on, say another perverted thing. I'm begging you. No? I choose life. Minoru screamed, diving under the nearest desk. Katsuki looked a little disappointed. Ugh, fine. You get off with a warning this time. Normally I'd call you out for bullying, but what Minoru is doing is blatant sexual harassment, so I'll overlook it this time, Mina commented with a smirk. Katsuki merely grunted in response. Tenya had his fists clenched in frustration upon his desk. 0 votes, it's only fair since I insisted upon the sacredness of the role. You didn't even vote for yourself despite wanting the job so badly, Hanta's sweat dropped. What's up with that? Mr. Ozawa got out of his sleeping bag and stood up, giving the class the final announcement. So then it's President Midoriya and Vice President Yuirosu. Now standing at the front of class, Izuku looked like he would panic at any second. Are you serious? Momo sighed. It was pretty close. That's it for homeroom today, Aizawa told them. Do your best in your other classes and prepare yourselves for the trials that await you in heroics training later. Izuku sighed, poking at his rice with his fork as he considered what had gone on that morning. Around him, Tenya, Ichako, Tsuyu, and Mina were also eating, though more enthusiastically than he was. What's the matter, Deku? Ichako asked after she swallowed a bite of her lunch. You look kinda worn out. Huh? Oh, it's nothing. He said quickly, snapping out of his little mental checkout. I was just wondering if I've really got what it takes for this whole class president thing. Mina elbowed his arm playfully. Sure you are. Tenya nodded. You'll be fine. You've got the guts and snap judgment when it counts, Izuku. That's why I voted for you. So one of the votes was you. Izuku gave the other teen a perplexed look, shaking his head before leaning his chin on his palm. That's another thing, how did I get 5 votes? Well, I assume you voted for yourself, plus Tenya voted for you, so you held a finger up, adding more as she listed off names. I flipped a coin between you and Momo since I couldn't decide, and you won that flip, so 3. Mina voted for you, too. Wait, what? Izuku whipped his head to gape at the 2 girls, and his jaw fell open. You 2 voted for me. Mina snickered and poked his freckles with a pink finger, causing the teen to blush furiously. You set up one hell of a kick for Katsuki yesterday to stop Minoru from doing perverted things to us. I saved one of those pictures as my screensaver, even. But Katsuki is still too much of an ass for us to vote for him. That's how you got my approval. Ichako too, right? Izuku spun back to Ichako, who half choked on her rice when Mina called her out. Ichako managed to swallow the bite down and sighed in relief for a second. She grinned bashfully and rubbed the back of her head. Yeah. Guilty. Izuku wasn't sure what shocked him more. The fact that he'd somehow managed to become class president, or the fact that more than half of the votes for him came from teenage girls his age. Seriously, he barely knew anything about them. They were an alien species to him. But I'm surprised you didn't vote for yourself, Tenya. Ichako said hurriedly in an effort to swing the attention away from her. You wanted to be class president so badly. You've got the glasses look down, too. Izuku's sweat dropped. That's not exactly a quality we should be using to choose a class president. I merely followed my own judgment on the matter, Tenya replied. Besides, even if I had voted for myself, the rest of your votes would have assured Izuku the presidency. Suddenly, the room was filled with the ringing of an alarm, causing the 5 of them to jump. An announcement rang over the speakers. Security level 3 has been breached. Students, please promptly evacuate. Tenyu's hat jerked towards one of the nearby upperclassmen. What's security level 3? It means someone's infiltrated the school grounds. This hasn't happened in 3 years. We gotta hurry out of here. The whole lunchroom immediately became a scene of mass hysteria as students scrambled to get out. Izuku knew there'd be no getting out if they got swept into that crowd, so he pushed aside his lunch and jumped onto the table to get a better look around. His eyes locked onto the windows nearby, spotting President Mick and Mr. Aizawa standing outside. They were facing a crowd of reporters, who were clamoring at the pair of pros for All Might. Izuku blinked in disbelief at the sight. The press got into the school. How? He spun around, trying to figure out how to settle the panicking students. If it was just the press, then this whole mass hysteria thing wasn't worth it, and would only get someone hurt. Izuku tried to speak up, but it came out as a squeak. Hey. Everybody calm down. It's just the news. No one heard him, not even his friends, who had taken a point from him and were standing on their seats. Tenyu was snapping at the other students to form an orderly line, but it was no good. Everyone was panicking. It's no good, how do I get their attention? Izuku wondered frantically. Suddenly, he had an idea. Albeit a crazy idea, but he took a deep breath and clenched his fists tightly. When in doubt, speak Katsuki. Everyone in the room froze at the scream and spun towards the source, one very red-faced Izuku, standing on the table with both hands clapped over his mouth. He couldn't believe he'd gotten the nerve to do that, but he did his best to act as soon as he got their attention. It's just the press. Look. He pointed at the window, prompting the rest of the students to look over and confirm for themselves that he was right. The moment they all started figuring it out, Izuku jumped off the table and did his best to hide. Holy crap, that was way too much. Not exactly what I'd call a great way of getting attention, but Mina grinned a little. Nice. Why are you hiding now? Tsuyu asked him bluntly. Izuku was sweating, his face still cherry red. I've never yelled at a bunch of people like that before, it's scary. Ichako put a hand over her mouth to stop herself from giggling. You sounded like Katsuki for a second, there. Tenyu chopped a hand towards him. Well, I applaud Izuku for settling the hysteria, we must still evacuate. Press or not, we still have evacuating instructions. She's right, Izuku said, fanning his face. Let's go. Mina smiled and patted him on the shoulder, causing him to tense up again. Good going, Mr. Scaredy Class Prez. Once the reporters had been dealt with, the rest of the day went by as usual. As soon as it was time for heroics class, they dressed up in their costumes, and made their way out to the entrance to the same training field as yesterday for the battle trials. Mr. Aizawa and All Might both were waiting for them. The former of the two pros cleared his throat and started explaining the lesson. Right, this is going to be somewhat similar to the entrance exam. There will be combat robots all over the city, but this time your job is going to be about working as a team. Yesterday you got to work together in pairs, this time you will be working as a whole class. On occasion, pros have to work in large groups. This is meant to simulate that kind of scenario. We'll be doing this exercise today and tomorrow, followed by rescue training on Friday. I want you all to keep in mind that this is merely a rough outline of much more advanced training for later. Your task is simple, eliminate as many of the enemy villains as possible by working together as a team. You should also focus on keeping the amount of damage done to buildings to a minimum. In the field, leaving behind destroyed buildings is obviously not ideal. I'm looking at you, Katsuki. Katsuki looked away from them all, slightly red in the face. Shut up. I'll be watching with Recovery Girl in case things get out of hand, Aizawa went on. Oh, and one more thing. Izuku, you're not participating in this training today. You're working with All Might. The pretty much the entire class exclaimed, including Izuku. Wait, Izuku's getting lessons from All Might. Tajiro's jaw was hanging open. Why just him? Meizo questioned. Yeah, why is the class president getting extra lessons from the world's greatest hero? Favoritism much, I think we need a better president. Minoru tried to convince the others to join his side, but to no avail. Aizawa sighed tiredly. Would you lot quiet down? We're wasting time. The class quieted, albeit reluctantly, as All Might took center stage. I'm sure you're all wondering why young Izuku is getting extra lessons separate from the rest of you, but it's not what you think. I'm not training him personally or giving him special privileges. He's getting, shall we call it, a corrective course. Corrective course? Tenyu echoed. Did he do something wrong? He blew his body up twice in as many days with his quirk, Aizawa replied bluntly. That's the problem. His main method of fighting with his quirk critically damages both himself because he lacks control, and could endanger the lives of anyone fighting him. That's where All Might comes in. He's an expert on quirk control. How? Denki asked. I mean, no offense, but all you do is punch and kick stuff. No offense taken, young Denki. But it's a bit more complicated than that, All Might answered. When I use my quirk, I have to gauge the amount of power I put into it very carefully. For example, against a giant robot, I can go full throttle and blow it away. But if I use that same level of power on a person, what would happen? A few faces paled at that thought. All Might nodded gravely. You've guessed. Yes, as gruesome as it is to say, I'd probably kill them with that kind of force. In order to avoid that, I must gauge the degree of power I release with each attack carefully. Too much can't kill a person. Too little might not be enough to capacitate my opponent. Power is just power without the finesse to guide it properly. Young Katsuki and young Shoto are good examples of this. Aizawa grunted. The two of them have a high power capacity, but they have the control to manage it well without overdoing things. For the time being, that's a skill Izuku lacks, so All Might is going to grill him until he doesn't blow himself up anymore. But that brings me to another thing I need to talk to you all about. Do any of you have trouble controlling your quirks? He asked. I know it might be embarrassing to admit, or perhaps you think you can control it in time, but I need to know right now before we get into any more serious training. If someone loses control and we have an accident, it can be forgiven, but I won't be the one picking you up if you get upset with yourself. Is that clear? The class was silent for a few seconds before one teen raised his hand. All Might looked at him, still smiling. Young Fumikage. It's somewhat situational, he began a little quietly. But on occasion, my quirk, Dark Shadow, has been known to run wild. I'd rather explain it more in private. I understand. All Might gave him a thumbs up. Anyone else? Ichako rubbed the back of her head nervously. I don't know if it's because I lack control or not, but if I use my quirk on myself for too long, I get really nauseous. That could be because you haven't trained your quirk enough yet, but I would still like to see it for myself, All Might replied. Is there anyone else? When no one responded, All Might set his hands on his HS. In that case, young Fumikage and young Ichako will meet with me after class ends today to discuss their quirks. You'll likely have a training session with myself and young Izuku tomorrow. If that's all, then I'll leave you to Mr. Aizawa. Young Izuku, you're with me. Izuku dipped his head quickly and chazzed after the pro as he walked off. Why yes sir. They ended up going to TDL, the place that Izuku had been brought before school started to show his quirk to the teachers. All Might led him inside and cleared his throat, immediately getting the boys' attention. I'm sorry that I singled you out from the rest of your classmates today, All Might began. But I felt it would be unwise to hold off training you to use One for All any longer. Recovery Girl gave me more than a few choice words when you destroyed your finger the other day. Sorry about that, Izuku mumbled. I was just desperate. It's fine. It's my fault for holding your training off for so long, the pro reassured him. But that stops now. We're going to get you to the point where you can use One for All safely. The easiest way to do that, in my experience, is through combat. Izuku paled. Wait, why you mean, like I have to fight why you? I'll go easy on you, All Might said gently, turning to face him. Today at least, I won't strike back. There's no point in beating you black and blue if you can't use your power properly yet. That wasn't exactly the most reassuring thing in the world, and Izuku still had a few concerns. Wait. What about what you said to the rest of class? If I can't control One for All and hit you full power, then you won't hurt me. All Might lifted one huge hand to tousle the teenager's curly hair. Fortunately for us, One for All comes with a sort of mental training wheels for new users. Training wheels. Yes. When you use One for All against a person for the first time, there's a tendency to think that you don't want to kill that person. One for All usually responds to that, and your body sets it to a low power setting that you should be able to handle without destroying yourself. Izuku blinked and began to mutter to himself. I see, so it's kind of like the mental restraints the brain puts on the human body to prevent it from destroying itself with the full capability of its muscles. All Might cut him off before Izuku could fully nerd out. That's the theory. But the idea is that you'll eventually get a grasp of that low power setting whenever you attack until you can use it at will. We'll continue training here until you get it down. Also, we'll be working on your own quirk as well. Ideally, I'd like to get you to the point where you can wield both One for All and All Flare at the same time. The pro pulled out a tablet that was similar to the one Nezu had used back when they tested Izuku's power for the first time, and just like before, the Bunsen burner-like device emerged from the floor. Izuku frowned at All Might nervously. I won't hurt you. My costume is fireproof, All Might chuckled, flexing his arms. No worries, young man. Okay, Izuku forced a smile on his face as he started using All Flare, green flames licking at his body. It wasn't even close to the full body flare, but he got his hands and feet ignited on his own easily enough this time. He reached out towards the Bunsen burner to gather more flames until his arms, legs, and most of his torso were all ablaze. All Might grinned as the flames finally covered the teen's whole body, including the two extensions of his costume that resembled All Might's hair. They started to sway gently with the fire, hiding the fact that they were really horns. Come at me with everything you've got, young Izuku. Yes. Izuku shouted back, then rushed All Might head on. He brought a fist back, clenching it tightly to wind up One for All. All Might raised both arms to block and took the blow directly, shifting into a crouch so that his center of gravity was lower. The punch struck All Might's thick arms, but it didn't even make him budge. Izuku gaped in surprise. He hadn't blown his arm up with that, but he expected it to have more of an effect. "Don't stop now," All Might told him, still grinning. "I told you the power output would be low. Just get used to the feeling of it. Keep going." Izuku jolted into action and began to punch and kick at All Might with one for all, never letting up on his blows. The pro withered them with ease, not so much as flinching from every strike that landed. After a few minutes of attacking him, All Might suddenly dodged one of Izuku's punches, causing him to yelp and overextend. He nearly fell over, but regained his balance. All Might laughed. "You're getting it, but a villain isn't going to stay put and let you attack them. Come and get me." The teen lunged after his pro mentor with a yell, but caught the blow with his hand, and simply diverted the attack before he jumped away again. All Might wasn't even using one for all himself, otherwise there would be no way Izuku could keep up with him. Izuku suddenly missed one of his punches, and ended up smashing his fists into one of the cement pillars in the room. He winced, but grinned a moment in pleasant surprise. He hadn't accidentally unleashed the full 100% by striking the rock. And he was starting to get a feel for the slow power setting, but it took him time to wind it up in each limb one after another. A thought struck him. Maybe if I spread it all over me like all flare. He tensed up and slowly let one for all spread through his whole body. The power crackled like lightning through his muscles, bones, and blood. It was tricky to maintain, and he didn't think he could hold it for long, but this would be a lot faster and more efficient than just firing up one limb after another. All Might noticed the change and grinned widely. He could see that Izuku's body was starting to adapt to one for all, just as it had with all flare. In fact, the two quirks were starting to mix. Izuku whipped towards All Might and lunged at him, this time much faster than before. With the low power setting spread throughout his whole body, he was able to push off with his legs, using that enhanced strength and a burst of his flames. The sudden increase in speed caught All Might off guard momentarily, but he responded with inhuman reflexes. He ducked underneath a kick that would have caught him in the side of the head, and reached up to grab the teenager by the ankle, then threw him aside. Izuku hit the ground with a yelp, but he rolled back to his feet and charged again, still intent on fighting. All Might started laughing as the teen attacked him in earnest, firing off blow after blow at him with the fusing quirks. It wasn't a perfect fusion by any means, and Izuku was visibly struggling to maintain the combination, but he could do it. "Let me try this." Izuku was starting to feel excited by his new capabilities. He gathered all of the flames covering his body into his right arm, until he had created an enlarged arm of fire that would extend his reach. With a battle cry that freed itself, unbidden from his lungs, he struck at All Might with it. The pro's hand shot out to catch the blow, but his upper body was engulfed in emerald flame, as Izuku launched a fire fist at him upon impact. Izuku suddenly realized that he practically buried his teacher in fire and immediately shut them down, freeing All Might from the blast of flames, and simultaneously stopping the flow of one for all throughout his body. "I am sorry. I got carried away. Are you?" All Might started laughing wildly, uproariously, making Izuku go quiet in confusion. The pro's hair looked a bit singed, and he was practically steaming from the heat, but his grin persisted nonetheless. "That was excellent," All Might exclaimed. "You're learning quickly." Izuku felt a swell of hesitant pride rise up in him. "Oh really? Indeed. Did you break any bones?" The teen looked himself over and gauged the feeling in his body. He didn't think he'd broken anything, but his right fist felt a little strained, and it was definitely tender from that last blow. "I don't think so, but I might have overdone things with my right. Considering this was your first go using the low power setting of one for all, I think we can call that a success." All Might gave him a thumbs up. "The whole point of this training is to help you reach a point where you can use one for all without destroying your body. At the moment, I'd say you're capable of wielding about 5% or so." "Only 5%. Izuku wilted slightly. "That was it. We've all got to start somewhere." All Might patted his shoulder. "Your body still needs training before it can handle the full power of one for all. We'll just work our way up from here, right?" Izuku smiled a bit and nodded. "Right." But All Might took a few steps back. "Back to it, then. Go easy with your right and don't throw that huge fire punch again for today. I want you to be able to use that 5% for as long as possible without going over the limit. Flare yourself back up and come with me, young man." "Yes sir." Ow, Izuku winced as he walked to the lockers. His body hurt all over, and his right hand was starting to throb. He hadn't broken any bones, but everything hurt from his extensive use of one for all, plus he felt a little too hot after using his flames for so long. As he approached the lockers, he realized that his whole class was gathered outside the girls' locker room, and all of them were still wearing their hero costumes. Frowning, Izuku approached them. Ichako spotted him coming over and waved. "Oh, Deku. How'd it go?" "Great," he replied, smiling. "I didn't break any of my bones this time." "What's going on?" Momo turned towards him with her arms crossed. "We can hear strange noises coming from inside our lockers." None of us girls have gone inside, so we're not sure who could be in there. It sounds like an animal, Kyuka muttered. One of her jacks was plugged into the door. There's loud breathing and something keeps hitting the lockers. How could an animal get into the locker room, anyway? Ijiro asked, perplexed. No idea, Mina replied with a grumble. But I'm not going in there until I know what exactly it is. Move it, heartthrob. Katsuki pushed Kyuka aside, who was a little flustered by his choice of a nickname, and placed his ear against the door. His eyes narrowed suddenly. Hey Deku. Listen. Izuku did as he asked and mirrored his pose, listening to the odd sounds. It sure sounded like an animal was in there. Heavy breathing, something rattling the lockers, and yet also. He stiffened. Katsuki heard it too and snarled. My PAL senses are tingling. You did not just use that quote, Dinky accused in disbelief. Izuku leaned away from the door, his face serious and his tone all business. Right, Katsuki and I are going in. Bar the door and don't let anything out until I say so. Wait, you intend to enter the girls' locker room? Tenyu demanded, chopping his hand at Izuku. Mr. President, that is a blatant disregard of the rules. Momo did her best to ease his concerns. It's fine, I trust them not to mess with our stuff. If a teacher comes by, we'll explain the situation. Be careful, you two. Izuku nodded and gripped the door handle slowly. He looked at Katsuki, who cracked his knuckles with an eager grin. Ready. I was born ready, MF. Izuku smirked at that, then quickly yanked open the door, letting Katsuki in before he dove in after him. Momo immediately shut the door behind them. Things were quiet for a few seconds. They still heard the loud breathing as Kyuka plugged one of her jacks into the door. It was several moments before everything went absolutely silent. 10 seconds of no sound passed by eerily. Class 1A waited, the air becoming thick with tension. Then they heard a shrill scream, followed by a roar of fury from Katsuki and a yell from Izuku. The sounds of metal clanging loudly began to ravage the lockers, along with several explosions courtesy of Katsuki. Die. 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 Drop them. Drop them right now. Never. They're my trophies. You little effer. Come here. You'll kill me. That's the effing point. You won't take me alive. I'm gonna murder you anyway. Corner it in the showers. It's trying to climb the walls. I've got it. Let me go. Deku. Don't do it. You have to finish it, Katsuki. Go on without me. Deku knew. No. My trophies. The only trophy you're getting is a coffin. This is for Deku, you little shit. There was a loud squeal, followed by a scream from Izuku. Clear the door. The class practically leapt away from the door as Katsuki screamed at the top of his lungs. Plus Ultra D. A horrifying scream tore through the locker room, followed by an explosive projectile that literally blew the door clean off its hinges. The object in question flew through the air for several hundred meters, perhaps even 1,000, before it crashed into the wall surrounding campus and hung there, 6 feet off the ground. The utterly stunned class realized the projectile had been one Minoru Mineta, now bloodied and beaten within an inch of his life, and once more stuck on the wall of UA by his own sticky hair. Katsuki emerged from the devastation gasping for breath and slumped to the ground once he made it out. Holy F. Ijiro and Kyuka ran up to him. Are you okay? Katsuki waved them off. Forget about me, get to Deku. It could already be too late for him. Exchanging anxious looks, the other girls ran inside, while Momo stopped the rest of the males from entering the lockers. Deku. Ichako called through the smoke. Christ, the place looked like a war zone. Where are you? I'm here, his voice sounded weak and shaky. Ichako ran over to the showers with Mina, Tsuyu, and Toru right behind her. They found Izuku curled up in a corner, breathing heavily and shaking. She was alarmed that maybe he'd been really hurt. Deku, are you okay? And no, he whimpered, turning to show them his hands. Now I'm the pervert. Stuck to his hands were 2 of Minoru's purple spheres, and also stuck upon each one was a pair of pants. Minoru had, after pillaging the garments from the lockers, stuck them to his hair in an effort to keep his prize, until Izuku yanked them from the thief's head at the grave cost of his own morality. Mina's cheeks puffed up to stop herself, but she couldn't hold back and busted out laughing until she was doubled over, and her sides hurt like hell. Ahahahaha. The other girls joined in, though they sounded slightly more sympathetic to Izuku's plight. They did feel bad. The preciously innocent and sweet teenage boy was almost in tears, since there was no way to remove the spheres, and thus the pant, from his tainted hands. Mina finally regained control of her breathing, and eyed the frilly pink pair of underwear stuck on Izuku's right hand. She giggled and wiped a stray tear from her eye. Izuku, you can just burn them off with your quirk. I don't want those since Minoru touched them, anyway. Same here, Toru agreed, recognizing her own pair of blue and white striped pant in the teen's left hand. But Izuku's already crimson face started to steam from embarrassment. Then UW won't have any UU underwear for the D-Day. Toru shrugged. That's fine, no one will notice if I don't wear any. Besides, it's almost time for us to go home, Mina reassured him. We'll just head straight back to get new ones, okay? Izuku nodded after a moment, still blushing furiously. Ichako couldn't help but smile at him. Come on, let's get you out of here before a teacher shows up. She carefully held Izuku's stand without touching his hands, and they walked the teen out of the lockers. Upon arriving at the door, however, Izuku bumped into someone and yelped, I am sorry. Please watch out for my hands. All Might stared down at him, unsure what to even think when he saw Izuku walking out of the girl's locker, 2 purple balls in his hands, and a pair of pants stuck to each. Moreover, by bumping into All Might, Izuku had instinctively recoiled and caused the sticky spheres to land on his own chest. Now it appeared as though he had 2 purple B-whip pants on top and was pinging them. The blood drained from Izuku's face faster than should have been possible as All Might just tried to process what in the actual F he was looking at. The pro slowly turned, following the path of destruction to the door that lay 100 meters away, and then to the bleeding ruin that was Minoru attached to the wall. He eventually looked back at Izuku, opened his mouth, closed it, and then finally walked off to do something about Minoru. Okay. And that was that. Having finished their homework for the night, Izuku and Katsuki were hanging out at Katsuki's home, and spending the last hour or so before Izuku had to go home playing games on a PlayStation 2. They were currently playing Guitar Hero 3. Legends of Rock, trying to win on Through the Fire and Flames, set to moderate difficulty. Neither of them had ever beaten this song on hard mode, god tier that it was. Goddammit, Katsuki swore as he missed a note. He recovered quickly, but this song was utterly unforgiving if you really got off track. Izuku was biting his lip, trying to focus. The 4.5 minutes or so they spent on this song brought with it as much intensity as one of their training sessions at UA. They barely took a moment to breathe. When it was all said and done, the 2 teens flopped onto the couch behind them with near simultaneous groans. Izuku set his guitar aside while Katsuki just chucked his onto the floor. I'm over this effing thing for the night, he growled, shaking his left hand to work the sore muscles out. I second that, Izuku leaned his head on the back of the couch with a sigh. It always felt good to be through the fire and flames, but good God it took a lot out of you, especially after a hard day at high school. I'm going home, he decided after glancing at the clock. He only had like 10 minutes before he had to leave anyways, and he was getting tired. Katsuki grunted. Whatever. See ya. Yup, Izuku replied, walking to the kitchen table to grab his backpack. Katsuki's mother was there, sipping on a cup of coffee while she scrolled through something on her phone. She looked up as he came by to pick up his stuff. Going home? Yes ma'am. Thanks for having me over. Need a ride? It's okay. I want to burn off some more energy before I get home. Suit yourself, she shrugged. Night, Izuku. Good night, Bakuman. Yes, he called her that. Only Katsuki thought it was weird. No, he did not care. Izuku left the Bakugo's house and made straight for his own family's apartment. It was only like a 10-minute walk, but it gave him time to reflect on stuff. The last 2 days had been crazy at school. The majority of the class had continued the robot battling exercises that started yesterday during today's lesson as well. Ichako and Fumikage had joined him, and All Might for a training session to get their quirks checked out for control issues. All Might had confirmed that Ichako's issue with her quirk causing her nausea was due to her needing more practice with it. She would just have to build herself up until she could either suppress the nausea or hold it off for a longer amount of time. Fumikage was something else. Cementus had created a dark isolation room with his quirk for All Might to see what was going on with the teen's control problem, so Izuku hadn't actually seen what happened inside, but whatever it was made the building tremor multiple times. That went on for about 30 seconds until what seemed like an artillery shell impact stopped the prior tremors cold. When Cementus retracted the room with concrete, Fumikage was nearly unconscious, and All Might had a nasty-looking bruise forming on his arm. The pro hero didn't look all that exerted, though he seemed rather impressed by what he'd seen. Dark Shadow became timid once he was exposed to light, but Izuku could have sworn he heard the shadowy creature mutter something like, I didn't get to show off after the event. What the hell even had happened in there? All Might had told Fumikage, once he recovered from whatever he'd endured within the dark room, that he would need lessons to control his quirk like Izuku did, but he was okay to perform in daytime operations with the rest of class. That didn't seem to surprise Fumikage, although he seemed more than a little stunned by what had gone down in the dark room. When Izuku and Ichako asked him later, all he said was this. He stopped Dark Shadow with one shot, Fumikage muttered in a sort of odd daze. Izuku didn't use his full-body flare during the sessions with Ichako and Fumikage. He managed to get the flames going on his hands and feet, but there was no way in hell he was going to go for the full-on flare with them around. He was still trying to get comfortable using it with All Might, and he trusted the pro more than pretty much anyone. Regulating one for all was getting better. Izuku hadn't broken any bones during these training sessions, but he didn't quite feel like he was fully adapted to the low-power setting yet. The few times he tried targeting a non-human object, like a cement target made by Cementus, he could feel his power fluctuate, and it took a while to get it back under control. All Might had told him that targeting a person and a non-living object would be different from a mental standpoint, but he hadn't thought it would be this hard. Practice, practice, practice. That was all he could do for now, until he got used to the low power setting. Izuku was so caught up in his thoughts that he didn't watch where he was going and startled when a small shape ran into him. He nearly stumbled, but kept his footing, eyes going wide when the child who ran into him fell back with a gasp. "I am sorry," he yelled, kneeling immediately to check if they were okay. "Did I hurt you?" The child, a little girl, stared up at him with wide, red eyes, her face covered in sweat while she panted for breath. She couldn't have been older than 6 or 7, with long, choppy white hair and a small horn on the right side of her forehead. She was wearing a short-sleeved dress with no footwear, but what really caught Izuku off guard were the bandages covering her arms and legs. She initially cringed away from him, but froze when he lay his hand gently on her shoulder. Her white eyes were uncertain as she opened her mouth to answer him. "Eri, there you are. Geez, stop running, will you?" Izuku looked up from the child expecting to see a parent, so he was stunned when he found himself looking at a tall, muscular man in a black suit, wearing a dark red beak-shaped mask over his face. He couldn't see the man's face at all, so the only way he was able to tell the individual was male was by his voice and body. The man's hand clenched a little, as though he were irritated and trying to stop himself from making a fist. "Who are you?" "Actually, never mind, I don't care. Sorry if my daughter bumped into you, but we gotta get going now. Come on, Eri." "Oh well. It was my fault she fell. I'm sorry." Izuku started to help her stand up. "Here, let me." Eri said something under her breath that he couldn't catch. "Say again." One of her little hands clenched the fabric of his shirt, and Izuku was suddenly aware that she was shaking. Her voice was hoarse and he could hear the tremor in every word she spoke. "He's not my daddy." The raw terror in her voice sent a chill up his spine, but Izuku forced down any visible reactions he might have had. If the kidnapper figured out that Izuku knew what was going on, there was no telling what he would do. Worst case scenario, he would go on the attack. His mind started to race, running calculations and scenarios through every cell his brain had to spare. Contact the police. No, too slow to respond given the situation. It wasn't like he could talk to them, either. They might assume his call was a prank or something. Not worth the risk. Pick up Yuri and run. Too risky. He didn't know if this guy was armed or what his quirk was. He needed more data to make that plan work. Fight the villain. Even riskier. In addition to the formerly mentioned unknown factors, Izuku had no idea if this guy would care about damaging the houses around them. He didn't want to get innocent people involved in this, and it would put Eri in further danger. He also didn't have a hero license yet, so a head-on attack would be illegal. He could only fight back in self-defense. Try to get in touch with one of his emergency contacts and stall for time. Chancy at best, given that he didn't know where exactly his contacts were, and he would have to stall for time. The odds were it would take several minutes at the very least, but it was the best option he had at the moment. That would be his starting point. There was no other choice. He'd have to pick the situation apart as it went on and adapt from there. "Were you guys playing T-tag or something?" Izuku asked the villain, trying to keep his voice normal. He made a show of looking around and behind the guy. "Is someone else chasing you?" It was just luck on Izuku's part that the villain reflexively followed his gaze to look over his shoulder. "Nah, it's just us. But she ran a bit too far away from the motel we're staying at." "Gotcha." Izuku slowly helped Eri up onto her feet, letting her remain close to him. The way she was attached to his torso would make it harder for the villain to spot his left arm hiding behind him, taking his phone out of his back pocket, and dialing the second emergency contact on his phone right after his mother. "Hey, I think she got her deaf fooling earlier. We should take her to a doctor to see if she's okay." The man cocked his head back towards Izuku and Eri. "No need, my boss is a doctor. He'll fix her up." Eri whimpered and squeezed Izuku's shirt tighter. She knew the doctor, Izuku realized, and he probably wasn't a good person. The way she reacted made him suspicious that this wasn't just a kidnapping, it might be a retrieval. The villain seemed familiar with Eri, and she knew the doctor he was talking about. He wondered if that was why she was covered in bandages. They'd hurt her and she tried to escape. Now one of them had caught up to her, and Izuku had no intention of letting them take her back. He mentally added in the possibility that there were other villains around looking for her. The guy mentioned a boss, so he probably wasn't the only crony around here. "Eri, come on, we gotta go," the villain ordered. Izuku looked up at the man, trying to make eye contact, but it was impossible with his mask. "I think she's a little spooked. How about I walk back to the motel with you guys? To make up for me causing her to fall." "No," Izuku could hear the edge to his voice this time. The villain was getting impatient. Boss doesn't like strangers popping up out of nowhere. "Eri, get over here, now." She stilled for a moment, and then let Izuku go, spinning around to go to the man. It caught him so off guard that she would actually move towards the kidnapper that Izuku acted without thinking and pulled her back to him, holding her protectively. Eri gasped, looking at Izuku with horrified eyes. He froze, staring at the villain. The villain went utterly silent for several seconds. His head cocked to the side a little. "Hey, you were just a little annoying a moment ago, but now you're getting on my nerves." He'd fed up. Oh, he'd effed up bad. The man's hand clenched again, and Izuku saw a spark of flame rush along his fingers. I'm only going to ask you this once since you were so polite earlier. Give her back to me and I'll forget about you. A flame quirk. The villain had a flame quirk. Izuku ran that information through his calculations. His chances of successfully fighting off the villain or retreating from him with the area had just greatly increased. He just had to stall for as long as possible. Izuku felt the rush of blood through his veins, the same as it had when he tried to save Katsuki and Ichako before. I don't feel comfortable just letting her leave with you. I'd rather we go to the hospital. Wrong answer, the villain snarled. He held up both arms, letting flame blaze over his limbs, until they were both burning up to his shoulder. Boss ain't gonna like this, but he'll like it less if I don't bring Eri back. Izuku got a shock when the villain launched a fireball straight at them, regardless of Eri being in the way. He barely had time to get both arms around her and jump away before the flames rushed over the street. What are you doing? He gasped, shocked by the villain's total disregard for the girl. You could have killed her. Like I care. The villain gathered up some of his flames in his right hand and threw another fireball, which Izuku dodged again. Even if I F her up, the boss can just fix her again. So the villain didn't give a damn whether he hit Eri or not. That shifted the odds out of Izuku's favor somewhat, but he could still work with this. The guy was chucking fireballs all over the street. Izuku could take advantage of this. He landed with Eri still in his arms, and faced an oncoming fireball head-on. One of his hands whipped up, becoming enveloped in emerald flame, and drew the outside source of fire to him. Izuku's flames consumed the villains and transmuted them in a matter of seconds, giving him more fire to work with. The villain appeared to be dumbfounded for a moment. Izuku took the chance to stuff his phone back in his pocket, but it was only a split second later that the villain lost his cool completely. What the hell's up with that? I'm gonna roast you. He started throwing fireballs with even greater speed. They were smaller than before, but it wouldn't be possible to dodge them all. That was fine with him. Izuku used the flames he'd already converted and directed them to form a shield between him and the villain. Each fireball that struck the wall of emerald was greedily devoured and converted into Izuku's flames, giving him an ever-growing barrier to protect himself and Eri with. Eri had her face buried in his shoulder, crying hysterically in fear. Izuku spared a moment to try and calm her. It's okay. I'll protect you. Will you just die already? Izuku's face whipped up, spotting the villain as he jumped high in the air. The man put both arms together to form a fireball the size of a small car, and then hurled it at them. Izuku immediately directed his flames to intercept the massive conflagration and render it harmless. This guy really isn't holding back. How long until he ends up hitting a house? He suddenly saw a blur of motion to his right, and his eyes widened in shock. The villain had landed while he'd been busy with the fireball and flanked them with surprising speed. He whipped out a knife from the inside of his suit and stabbed at Izuku. The team desperately tried to shoot his flames at the villain, but he'd spotted the attack too late. I wouldn't make it. Die. The word was definitely one a villain would use given the situation, so it surprised Izuku even more when an explosion blew the masked criminal away from them. He yelped as a mess of spiky blonde hair landed in the spot the villain had been in just a moment before, scowling and looking exceptional. Hey, don't start a street fight without me, Deku. Katsuki snapped at him. He was wearing a pair of dark basketball shorts and a black tank top. And pick your timing better. I'm tired, you acid. I'm sorry, Izuku answered quickly, directing his attention back to the villain. The man shook himself, recovering from the explosion quickly. Katsuki stared at the beaked criminal. Who's the rooster? He's a kidnapper, Izuku replied, tightening his grip around Eri, who was still buried in his shoulder. And he's after this girl. I think she got away from him, and now he's trying to get her back to his boss. That's so? Katsuki cracked his knuckles, a maniacal grin forming on his face. Then the sentence is death. I already called for backup, Izuku told him quietly. We just have to stall. His quirk lets him throw fireballs, but he's also got that knife. We should keep our distance and fight defensively. I can negate his fire if you can keep him away. Also, I don't know if he's got friends around here. We gotta watch our backs. Geez, how fast did you come up with that, you nerd? Works for me, though. The blonde teen let a few small explosions pop off in his palms to warm himself up. Let's kill his ass. The villain was fully raging now and charged them with both arms of flame. I'm gonna turn the two of you into a pile of ashes. Izuku thrust his hand towards the charging villain, directing a stream of green fire at him. The villain dodged to the side and rushed in close. He was a lot faster than he looked. Katsuki was there in an instant, both hands held out towards the villain's face as the man closed in. Stun grenade. A burst of light and sound erupted towards the villain, setting off a bunch of car alarms, and making the man howl in pain. So his mask didn't filter bright light and noise that well. Izuku seized the opportunity to channel the stream of fire after the villain, but the man's reflexes were fast enough that he avoided them and backed off. You little effers are pissing me off so much. The villain screamed, lifting both hands up again. Izuku blanched as the man created a fireball that was way beyond any other before it. In a matter of seconds, it was nearly the size of a house. If that went off, it wouldn't be just them in the line of fire anymore. Izuku stood up in a flash. He had to flare up completely if he was going to stop the attack. He gripped Yuri tightly and opened his mouth, about to tell Katsuki to take her, so he could make full use of his quirk, but it was at that moment his backup arrived. New Hampshire, smash. Faster than they could blink, an object not unlike a meteor slammed into the villain from behind, pulverizing him into the ground and blowing the huge fireball into cinders. The impact created a crater in the street and nearly made Izuku trip, though he yelped and stumbled from the shock of it. Izuku and Katsuki stared at the cloud of debris as it settled, and a large muscular shadow stood up within it. The first thing they saw was a shock of blonde hair and a huge grin. It's alright now, boys. For I am here. All Might. Katsuki gaped in disbelief. How the hell why are you here? I was doing some work nearby and spotted a couple of fireballs flying around. All Might laughed, hands on his HS. His foot was keeping the now unconscious villain pinned to the ground. What are the odds you would be here? Sheesh, it seems like every time I see you two outside of school, you're fighting some villain. Slow it down some for this old man, will you? His eyes glinted at Izuku, and the boy quietly sighed in relief. All Might had gotten his emergency call and come running. He'd given Izuku that number solely for emergencies, telling him under no circumstances was he to call it otherwise. You're fine to shut your flames down, young Izuku, All Might told him, glancing down at the villain. He's in no shape to fight anymore. Alright, Izuku stammered, willing the emerald flames still flowing around them to dissipate and die out. The second they were gone, he smiled at All Might. Thanks for saving us. Of course. But if I might be so curious, the symbol of peace lifted the villain up by the collar with one hand, and studied his now broken mask. Why did you need saving in the first place? Izuku told everything he knew to All Might, all the while holding Eri close to him. She was staring at All Might with even wider eyes than before, as though she couldn't believe the villain had been crushed so easily. All Might scratched his chin. I see, in that case, let's first get this little one to a hospital to make sure she's not hurt, and to ensure you two are alright. After that, I'll get you boys home, but expect an interview with the police investigators tomorrow or the day after. They'll need your testimony to charge this guy. Katsuki shoved his hands into his pockets. He looked irritated again. Ugh, I didn't even get to kill this guy. All Might's sweat dropped, looking to Izuku for some sort of explanation to that statement. The teen laughed nervously. He's mad that he didn't get to beat the guy up. Ah. It's fortunate you didn't, though. The fact that you could have been injured aside, neither of you are officially qualified for hero work yet, All Might said. I know that, Katsuki huffed. It's still annoying, though. I understand. Come now, let's get you all to the hospital. And you should probably call your parents on the way to tell them you're alright. All Might called up a friend of his from the police, and got them all transferred to the hospital in less than an hour, while another escort took the villain to a prison. Once they got to the hospital, Izuku and Katsuki made it through the doctor's examinations in record time. Neither of them had been hurt in the fight, so they were deemed fine after just 15 minutes. But Eri was a completely different matter. She absolutely refused to let go of Izuku, and as soon as one of the doctors picked up a needle to take a small blood sample, she started sobbing until they put it away. The poor girl was utterly traumatized, and it took Izuku's reassurances and the better part of 2 hours for them to get even simple things like her weight, height, and blood pressure. When Izuku finally convinced her to let him remove her bandages, his face went pale. Dotting her arm along the inside of her elbow were a number of scars that looked an awful lot like insertion wounds from a needle. Someone had been either injecting something into her or taking something out for a long time. After seeing them, the doctors decided that extending the amount of time she was exposed to the environment in the hospital would only stress her further and be a negative influence on her health. They did a quick check for infections, then gave Izuku a few alcohol wipes to clean any open wounds. Eri would not let them touch her, and some fresh bandages. Izuku walked Eri to the hospital lobby, where All Might was waiting along with Izuku's mother, Inko. Katsuki had already been taken home by his parents. Inko rushed towards her son and swept him up into a hug. I'm so glad you're okay. I know you said you were alright, but I was so worried. Izuku hugged her back with his right arm. Eri was still clinging to his left. I'm sorry I scared you. I know, she sighed, letting him go and sniffling. Inko wiped away her tears with a handkerchief and looked at the frightened child holding on to Izuku. And who is this? This is Eri, Izuku replied, offering the girl a small smile. Eri, this is my mom, Inko. Hi, the girl managed a small squeak, but remained attached to Izuku's side. Inko smiled at the child gently. Hello Eri. I'm happy to meet you. All Might finished talking to the doctor in charge of Eri's examination, nodding as the man turned and left to tend to his other patients. The symbol of peace looked from Eri to Izuku. Well, she's clear to leave. They don't think it's wise to keep her here, since it stresses her out so badly. But where do we take her? Izuku asked with a frown. I mean, we don't even know who her parents are. It's a problem, All Might admitted. But if your mother agrees to it, I was thinking she could spend a night at your home. She's obviously more comfortable with you than anyone else right now. I can take her to UA if we need to, but I think it's best if she's with someone she trusts for tonight. She's been through a lot. Izuku looked at his mother. Mom. I don't mind, Inko replied, smiling again. Of course she can spend the night. All Might nodded. Bring her up to UA tomorrow, and we'll figure out where to go from there. More than likely, the police will find a foster home to take custody of her for a short while, until her parents can be located. Okay, Izuku knelt down so he was eye level with Eri and smiled at her. Does that sound good, Eri? We'll have a sleepover tonight at my house. Eri didn't have even the foggiest idea of what a sleepover was, but she didn't really care, as long as she got to stay with this boy. She had never felt safe with another person in her entire life. His hands were so gentle and kind and just protective. The feeling was completely alien to her, but she never wanted it to go away. So she gave him a shy smile and dipped her head. Okay. Fortunately, there was still a supermarket open with just 10 minutes left before closing time, so after Inko picked up Izuku and Eri from the hospital, she drove them out there to find some clothes for the girl. The white dress she wore was dirty from her running through the streets and small burn marks after the battle. Seeing as it was more or less ruined and she didn't have any other clothes, Inko decided that she needed to buy some more for the little girl. They hurried inside to grab some pajamas and a few simple outfits for Eri, and got out in record time. Once that was out of the way, Inko took them straight back to the apartment. I'll get a bath going for Eri, Inko told them as she removed her shoes by the door and set her purse down on the counter. Izuku, would you mind heating up dinner? It's in a container in the fridge. I will, he replied. Eri was still holding his hand, looking around the apartment with her large red eyes. Izuku looked down at her. Are you hungry? Eri nodded shyly at him. A little. Her tummy rumbled loudly, causing the girl to squeak and blush. She looked away from Izuku out of embarrassment, but he only smiled gently. Me too. Come on, let's get something to eat. Okay. Inko had made pork cutlets and rice for dinner, which Izuku extracted from the fridge and moved to a plate, so it could be heated up in the microwave. As it warmed up, the delicious scent of the meal started to fill the room, and Izuku realized with amusement that Eri was staring at the microwave with her adorable button nose twitching, while she drooled from the smell. As soon as it was warmed up, he divided their dinner evenly onto 2 plates, and got Eri situated in a chair beside him at the table. The girl's eyes started to sparkle as she gaped openly at the delicious food laying before her, but she glanced at Izuku nervously, as though she wasn't sure if it was okay for her to have it. Izuku took his chopsticks and picked up one of the pork cutlets on his plate, then blew on it for a moment to cool it before he bit into it. Eri was still watching him, so he smiled while chewing and nodded. She tried using the chopsticks as well, but it became clear after a few tries that she had no idea what she was doing. Eri pouted and glared at the utensils in frustration until Izuku helped her out, showing her how to hold them and pick up her food. When she finally took a bite of the pork cutlet, her eyes sparkled even more, and she almost forgot to chew in her haste to eat the delicious meal. Is it good? Izuku asked. MMHMM. She hummed back, her mouth stuffed full of food. They ate in relative silence until Inko came back into the kitchen. Eri, the bath is ready. Let's get you cleaned up, okay? Eri swallowed and looked at Izuku nervously, waiting until he smiled at her reassuringly before she answered Inko. Okay. She tugged on Izuku's sleeve as she got out of her chair, and it took him a moment to realize that she wanted him to come along. He glanced at his mother, who nodded silently, smiling somewhat in amusement. Alright, I'll come too. They got Eri into the bathroom where Inko had her take off her dirty white dress and underwear, before helping the girl get into the tub of warm water. Izuku was a little flustered by the whole experience. He didn't know a lot about children, and he knew even less about bathing them, so Inko took the lead. She got Eri cleaned up with body wash, while Izuku poured some shampoo into the girl's hair, and gently worked the soap through the messy white locks. Eri was halfway leaning out of the tub throughout it all, so that she could hold onto Izuku's shirt sleeve, only letting go when Inko had to clean her arms and hands, and then she immediately reattached herself to the teenager. Inko could already see that Eri had become very dependent on Izuku. Anyone else getting this attached so quickly would probably not be a good thing, but kids were different. She knew from experience how impressionable children were, and how easily they could form attachments. If Eri really had had no positive relationships in her life so far, it was no surprise to Inko why she had latched onto Izuku with such fervor. He had been the first person to show her kindness, the first to protect her, and the one who saved her from those terrible people. In Eri's mind, Izuku was literally the only safe place in the world. It didn't matter if she knew nothing about him because she had realized that he would not hurt her. To a child like her, his world growing up had probably been hostile at best. That was more than enough of a reason to stay close to him. As soon as Eri had been cleaned up, Inko helped dry her off with a towel, and then got Eri changed into some fresh pajamas, while Izuku took a quick shower, after Izuku assured Eri he would be back as fast as he could. Because Inko was so used to buying clothing like this for Izuku when he was Eri's age, they were All Might themed pajama pants and a sweater to keep the girl warm. As soon as she was changed, Inko took a brush and carefully worked it through the girl's hair. Izuku walked out of the bathroom in shorts and a white t-shirt, just as Inko nodded, happy with the image of Eri looking full, clean, and sleepy in her new pajamas. Okay, now you two get your teeth brushed and then get to bed. Izuku, there should be a spare toothbrush for Eri in the cabinet next to the sink. I'll get it, he promised, letting Eri take his hand again. She yawned, eyes drooping from sleepiness. As soon as their teeth were brushed, Eri held her arms up towards Izuku in the universal gesture all children made when they wanted to be picked up. Izuku did so after a short pause to figure out how to do it right, and got the little girl bundled up safely in his arms. Eri wrapped her small arms around his neck and clutched at his shirt, her eyes barely open. Izuku got them to his room, lifted the covers so that he could lay Eri down, but she whimpered after a moment. It's dark. Would a little light make it better? He asked. She nodded jerkily, and he made a mental note that she didn't like dark places. Okay, one moment. I'm sure I've still got it here somewhere. Still carrying Eri, Izuku walked to his bedstand and opened the drawer. He rummaged through it for a minute before pulling out an All Might themed nightlight he'd had as a child when he was also scared of the dark. Here we go. He plugged it in, and All Might's teeth glowed white, not blindingly so, but enough to keep the room from being really dark. Izuku looked at Eri. Is that better? She nodded, relaxing somewhat. Izuku got them into his bed and situated Eri, so she was lying next to him, but that proved to be pointless, because she crawled over and buried herself into his shirt as much as she could, tucking her legs up into his stomach. He couldn't help but smile at her and used his hand to brush aside some of her white hair behind the small horn on her forehead. Then he got his arms wrapped around the girl and curled his body around her, shielding her from the world as best he could. Good night, Eri. She managed some mumbled, incoherent reply, but Izuku knew she was more or less asleep now, so he just closed his eyes and slowly drifted off to sleep. Class 1A was already in their seats for homeroom, and Mr. Aizawa had just walked in, but as they got themselves ready for the day, they came to the realization that one of their classmates was missing. Izuku's not here? Momo asked, raising an eyebrow. That's odd, Tenya scratched his chin. He's not the type to be late. Is he sick? Ijiro glanced at Katsuki. Hey man, did Izuku text you or anything to say what was up? Katsuki scowled. What am I, his mom? I don't know what's taking the nerve, either. In the back of his mind, he was actually wondering just where in the hell Izuku had ended up. No one had told him anything about it since last night, but was it possible there had been more villain trouble involving the girl he and Izuku had saved? Ugh, the thought already had his fingers twitching. He was gonna be fidgety and in a bad mood until he got some answers. Regardless, let's get class started, Aizawa muttered, looking as tired as ever. It looks like everyone's here except for Izuku. Sorry, I'm late. The door flew open and everyone looked towards it, finding their class president standing there as they expected, but they weren't expecting the small child attached to his left hand peeking out from behind him. Eri was wearing an All Might themed hoodie over a pale yellow dress, long white socks, and a pair of yellow sandals. Aizawa just stared at Izuku, who was smiling nervously, and the even more nervous-looking girl who was locked onto him for a moment before he glanced back at the schedule for the day. Moving on. That's it, half the class exclaimed in disbelief. Hold up, we're just gonna skim over the fact that Izuku brought a kid to school. Denki demanded. She's cute, but why is she here? Tsuyu asked. Izuku scratched the back of his head. I am here to explain. Izuku and Eri both yelled and jumped in perfect sync, as All Might popped up behind them, waving his hand at the rest of the class. They had met with him upon arriving at school, but they had thought he was still speaking with Inko in his office. Aizawa looked mildly annoyed. All Might, don't barge in so early in the morning. Sorry, Aizawa. The symbol of peace apologized. I'll make this short and sweet. The class waited for him to give them an explanation for the current situation. Ahem, for reasons, Eri here will be with Izuku for a little bit. Get along, everyone. He gave them a thumbs up and his trademark wide grin. Akito was less than satisfied with that answer. That's too short and it's not sweet at all. Coming from the sugar man, that's harsh, Hanta muttered. Seriously though, that's all you're telling us. Sorry, but I can't tell you much right now, All Might apologized. For the time being, I just need you all to cooperate with Izuku so Eri feels comfortable, okay? Thank you. The pro took off then, probably running back to his office, so he could deflate and save energy on his time limit, leaving the class in an awkward silence. Izuku smiled with an equal amount of awkwardness. That's how it is. So this is Eri. Eri, these are my friends. They're nice, just a little noisy sometimes. Eri peeked out from behind Izuku again, and gave the class a nearly silent greeting. Hi. Oh my glob, she's adorable. Mina squealed, almost jumping out of her seat. Can I hug her? Aizawa sighed. Stay in your seat, Mina. Izuku, go grab an extra chair from the back for Eri. The rest of you listen up, will you? Time is limited. Be more rational. So while Izuku led Eri to the back of the room to get an extra chair, Aizawa looked over his papers for the day. Today we're going to be taking a break from the combat training we've been doing the last couple of days. Being a hero isn't just about fighting villains, you know. An even bigger part of it is rescuing people. That's going to be the scenario we'll tackle today: rescue training. You'll be supervised by a team of 3 including myself, All Might, and one other pro teaching here. When you come to the hero course later in the day, you can change into your costumes if you want, but it's not completely necessary this time. Some of your costumes probably aren't designed for these kinds of tasks yet, after all. Since the training area is fairly far away, we'll get there by bus. Do me a favor and hurry there when it's time. Aizawa grabbed his sleeping bag after that. That's all for homeroom. You'd best prepare yourselves for the trial ahead, kids. As soon as they got the all clear, Katsuki spun around in his desk to look at Izuku and Eri, who probably couldn't be sitting any closer to him if the seats were fused together. Explain. She ended up staying with Mom and I after what happened, Izuku replied, keeping his voice low, so the other students wouldn't hear, even as some of them got up to come over. All Might wants me to keep quiet about it, but she just feels safe with me, I guess. Katsuki glanced at Eri, who looked back at him nervously, and shrugged. Fair enough. That reminds me, how did you find us last night? Izuku asked him. It was too far away for you to hear anything from home, wasn't it? Oh yeah, I forgot. With all the craziness last night, Katsuki grabbed his bag and stuffed his arm into it for a few moments, rummaging around before he yanked out an All Might themed wallet. You left this on the table, moron. Mom made me run after you to give it back. Sorry, Izuku took it back gratefully and pocketed it. But thanks for showing up. You buying me extra spicy chicken wings after school? Yep. That was all they could say before half the class surrounded them, some eager, some curious to get a look at Eri. The girl cringed away from them and completely abandoned her chair to crawl into Izuku's lap and hide there, burying her face in his neck. Katsuki saw that and barked at their classmates. You scrubs have nothing else to do, back off or I'll kill you. Izuku wrapped his arms around Eri and smiled apologetically at his classmates. Sorry, she's pretty shy. Can you guys give us a bit of space? Oh, okay, Ichako, who was at the front of the group, backed up with the others so Izuku and Eri weren't boxed in and then crouched, sitting on her heels. She could see that the little girl was really nervous, so she offered her a bright smile. Eri, right. Hi Eri. I'm Ichako. Izuku gently rubbed Eri's back, reassuring her that everything was okay. It's alright, Eri. They won't hurt you. Eri shifted just enough so that she could peer at them with one eye, and tried to return the greeting. Hello. Suddenly, her eyes fixed on a dark beach shape Izuku's classmate, Fumikage. Eri stared at the falcon-headed boy for a grand total of 3 seconds, before she sucked in her breath and paled in terror. The day went by at a pretty casual pace, although Izuku's time was mostly occupied by Eri. None of the teachers had a problem with her in the classes, since she was more or less dead silent the entire time, choosing to focus on whatever Izuku was doing above anything else. She seemed content to just watch him take notes and do his work. Lunchtime came around and Eri was obviously rather intimidated by the huge cafeteria full of people, leaving Izuku torn about what to do. Fortunately, they were saved by All Might showing up again. There you are. His deep voice boomed as the symbol of peace approached the pair. Come with me. I've got lunch ready for you in my office. Izuku nodded and waved at his friends to go on without him. I'll see you guys later. Okay, Mina replied, smiling widely at the little girl attached to his arm. See you, Eri. Eri shyly hid her face in Izuku's shirt sleeve, and hurried along with him as they followed All Might to his office. Ichako watched them go curiously. I wonder what's going on for All Might to call them away. I think they might be related, Denki suggested. Izuku and Eri are both pretty shy, right? Don't be stupid, they look nothing alike for one. Kyoka shot the idea down instantly. Izuku's just introverted, not necessarily shy. He got pretty confident during our battle training, remember? Eri's more like, it's as though she's afraid of everything. I agree, Momo nodded. Did you see her face when she saw Fumikage earlier? No offense. None taken, it's a valid point, the falcon-faced teen looked rather grim. She was definitely afraid of me. My face can be a bit intimidating for little children, but that was different than what I'm used to. They were referring back to homeroom when Fumikage had come over, albeit at a distance like he usually did, to get a look at Eri. She had spotted him behind the other students, and all the blood had drained from her face, causing her to bury herself in Izuku's chest and shiver until he took her out of the room with a hurried apology. They hadn't come back to homeroom after that, and Fumikage noticed that Eri would do her best to hide whenever she saw him. He scared kids on accident before, but this was different. Her reaction was way too extreme to just be a simple fear. Ijiro glanced at Katsuki, who was already walking towards the lunch line. Hey Katsuki, do you know anything? You were chatting to Izuku earlier in homeroom. It's none of your business, he snapped. Katsuki knew about as much as Izuku did, but All Might had told him to keep quiet regarding the situation as a whole. He still hadn't even been interviewed by the police yet, after all. But he knew why Eri had been so terrified by the mere sight of Fumikage, and now it annoyed him even more that he hadn't gotten to pulverize that bird-masked bastard from the night before. All Might got them into his office and brought their lunch out of a small fridge kept in the corner. So, Aizawa told me there was a bit of an incident earlier in homeroom. Izuku nodded, squeezing Eri's hand comfortingly as he recalled the event. It's my fault. I didn't even consider that she might be afraid of Fumikage. He was mentally kicking himself for not establishing that Eri's kidnapper, and Fumikage looked similar as he rushed the girl out the room as quickly as possible, keeping her clutched to his chest. He had his backpack halfway sling over one shoulder and got them outside in just under a minute, finding a large tree for them to hide behind before he sank to the ground. Izuku stroked the back of her head gently, feeling her tremors reverberating through her whole body. Eri, breathe. She was crying silently with her face buried in his neck and her small hands clenched into fists. Izuku readjusted her in his arms, cradling the girl protectively. He lowered his face close to hers and murmured softly, reassuring her that everything was okay, that he had her, and that she was safe. SHH, he soothed her. SHH. HH is one of them. She gasped out. HLT take me back. No, and no, no. He's not one of them, Izuku reassured her, squeezing the girl tightly. He's one of my classmates, okay? I know he looks like them, but he's not, I promise. He's nothing like them. Eri wailed into his shirt. He's one of them. She suddenly froze and her eyes went wide. Izuku frowned and looked at her. Eri. No, she whispered, hands flying up to grab at her hair. No, 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 no. Izuku paled as her horn started to glow. He had no idea what a quirk was, but he had a really bad feeling it was about to react violently to protect her from this perceived harm. Eri, look at me. Let me go. She screamed, wriggling frantically out of his grasp. Izuku felt a horrific shock run through him, as though every cell in his body was shrieking at him to let her go. His paws let Eri get away from him completely, and before he could say anything, she touched a tree behind them. In an instant, the light emanating from her horn flared like lightning, and Izuku found himself falling back onto the ground with a yelp. He rolled onto his belly and pushed himself up quickly, blinking in shock. Eri was sitting on the ground, still crying as the light from her horn faded. The tree they had been leaning against was gone. Completely. As though it never existed. Izuku's blanched white as a sheet as he realized what just happened. If she hadn't gotten out of his grasp, she would have erased him. He didn't have time to really process that though, as the sound of Eri crying brought him back to reality. Eri? He asked softly, watching her horn carefully for any sign of another flare. I'll hurt you, she cried, hiding her face in her hands. And no. I don't wanna. Izuku knelt beside her, but he didn't touch her yet. Hey, I'm right here. Let me know when I can touch you, okay? She shook her head. He was alright. I'm cursed. I'll hurt you. You're not cursed, he promised. And you won't hurt me. You didn't hurt me at all, see? Eri peeked out at him through her fingers, but Izuku could see the tears flowing from her red eyes. He smiled at her, trying his best to look positive. It's okay. It was just an accident, alright. She sniffed and hid her face again. Izuku just remained where he was and waited. He couldn't push her further than she was willing to go. No matter how badly he wanted to wrap her in his arms and assure her that everything would be okay, Izuku had to be patient with her. She finally uncovered her face, but hugged her legs to her chest and set her head against her knees. I think I'm safe to touch now. Izuku slowly came over until he was sitting in front of her, and watched as Eri lifted her head to look at him, still crying and scared. She held her hands up at him, hoping desperately that he might be able to hold her again and make her feel safe. Izuku reached up and let their fingers touch, slowly sliding his much larger hands over hers, and squeezing them gently. Eri almost started crying again from relief. She didn't make him disappear. He scooped her up into his arms and held her to his chest, where Eri buried herself in his embrace and cried softly. Izuku let her release it all from her system and just held her there, ensuring the girl that she was safe, that he was safe, and that everything would be okay. When her tears at last came to a stop, Eri mumbled something into his shirt. Izuku pulled back slightly, but kept her close as he looked at her face. What? I'm sorry, she croaked, her voice raw from crying. She wouldn't look him in the eye. It's not your fault, Izuku insisted, stroking her hair. It's not okay. You can't control your quirk, can you? And no, she whimpered. The bird people never told me how. He shushed her gently. Don't think about them. They can't hurt you here. Remember what happened to that guy last night? We beat him up. She nodded into his chest. Izuku slowly rubbed little circles around her back to calm her down. The guy in my class isn't one of them, Eri. I promise. He won't hurt you, he's trying to become a hero like me. He's going to protect and save people, including you. He's one of the good guys. But, she sniffed. What if he tries to hurt me? If anyone tries to hurt you, I'll stop them, he said fiercely. I promise. Eri was quiet for a minute before she answered him. Okay. Izuku inwardly sighed, relieved that she was calm again. Can I see your face, Eri? She leaned back a little, eyes red, pale skin tear-stained, and her lips quivering. Izuku reached up and gently wiped away the tears with his thumbs, smiling at her. There are those pretty eyes I wanted to see. Iri's cheeks reddened from embarrassment, but the edges of her lips started to involuntarily twitch up. Izuku booped her button nose with the tip of his index finger. And there's that cute little nose of yours. She pursed her lips inwards, trying to stop the urge to smile. Izuku could tell that he was starting to get through to her and grinned. We've got those rosy cheeks, that beautiful snowy hair, and that perfect little horn, but where's that winning smile? She glared at him determinedly, fighting the rise of her lips and cheeks with all her might, as Izuku coaxed it out of her. The teenager smirked playfully. You know you want to. Iri shook her head, but Izuku tilted his head like a owl, and made a show of poking at the corners of her rising lips. You're definitely gonna smile. She shook her head more vigorously than before. Izuku decided he had to pull out the big guns to win her over. You're gonna smile just like. He pulled his best All Might impression out of nowhere, and grinned widely just like the symbol of peace, but it looked absolutely ridiculous on him. This. PFFT. Iri almost doubled over from how hard she started laughing, working herself into a fit of giggles until she could barely breathe. Izuku kept the impression up for as long as he could, since every time she saw that face again, she started laughing more and more. Eventually, he stopped because his face was starting to hurt, but it had the desired effect. All the tears had been converted from despair into joy, and she looked like a little girl should, peals of laughter ringing from her lips, and her sweet face scrunched up into an uncontrollable smile. Izuku waited until she was just giggling before he patted her head gently. Iri, I want you to know that it's okay if you can't control your quirk yet. We just have to teach you how. Now I'm going to tell you something, but you gotta keep it a secret, okay? She nodded, watching him curiously. Izuku took a deep breath and told her. My quirk scares a lot of people. None of my classmates know what it really is, but it's not a very nice power, okay? But All Might and my other teachers don't care if it's scary or that I don't like it, or that I can't control it very well yet. They're going to help me learn how to use it so I can help people. I'll help you just like they helped me, okay? And they'll help you, too. Iri stared at him with wide eyes. But you're a hero, aren't you? How could your power be scary? Izuku did his best to hide his grimace. My dad had the same quirk that I do, but he wasn't a good person. He was even scarier than the bird people. He used the quirk to do a lot of bad things. Not a lot of people know. He smiled and gently tousled her soft white hair. You've done nothing wrong. No one will be afraid of your quirk, especially once we teach you how to control it, okay? It'll be alright. Iri smiled back. You promise? Izuku held his hand up and extended his pinky, wrapping it around Iri's pinky, as she watched with a baffled expression. Pinky promise. She giggled again. Okay. Izuku didn't tell All Might yet what Iri had done with her quirk. He was still trying to process what he'd seen and analyze it as best he could. He didn't want to draw any hasty conclusions, but he had come up with a pretty incredible hypothesis, and he wanted to think about it a bit more before he told All Might. All Might smiled at Iri from across his desk. I'm sorry if you were frightened earlier, Iri. But let me just promise you that you're safe with us. Everyone at this school will protect you with their lives. Iri managed to smile back shyly, though she remained quiet while she ate a sandwich. All Might cleared his throat. This morning's incident is as much my fault as it is yours, young Izuku. I too forgot that she might be afraid when meeting young Fumikage. But now we've learned our lesson. Speaking of which, I regret to inform you that I probably won't be partaking in the training this afternoon. I've been rather busy all morning, you see, so you'll have someone taking my place during the rescue training. Izuku understood immediately. All Might had used up a lot of his muscle form's time limit, talking to his mother about Iri and running around the school doing what he had to do. Also, you, Katsuki, and I will be meeting with the police investigator this afternoon to talk about the incident last night, All Might went on. He's an old friend of mine whom I trust a great deal, so he should be able to help us. That sounds good to me, Izuku agreed. All Might nodded. That's all I really needed to tell you, so we can enjoy eating now. Once they finished eating, Izuku took Iri to the heroics classroom and met up with the other members of his class for their training. Like Aizawa had told them, they had to change quickly so they could board the bus, but Izuku found himself with the dilemma of what to do with Iri while he changed in the boys' lockers. As it turned out, Achako and Mina came up with the perfect solution. She could stay with us while we get changed, Achako suggested. Yeah. Mina knelt in front of Iri and smiled widely, pointing from her own horns to the little girls. We're horn buddies, so we'll totes get along. Izuku looked at Iri, who seemed nervous at the prospect of being away from him. It'll be for just a minute, Iri, then I'll be right back. Okay. She finally nodded, though she glanced back after him a few times as Achako and Mina led her to the girls' locker room. Izuku went into the boys' lockers and started changing into his hero costume as fast as he could. Some of the other guys saw him moving unusually quick and commented on it. Sheesh, you pumped up, Izuku, Denki snickered. Slow down before you hurt yourself. Sorry, I just don't want to leave Yuri alone for too long, he replied as he locked his utility belt around his waist. Panta glanced at him from around his locker. Oh yeah, how's that going? She looked kind of freaked out during homeroom. We thought it might have been because she saw Fumikage. Yeah, Izuku shot the hawk-faced boy an apologetic smile. I'm sorry about that, Fumikage. She's not really scared of you, she's had some bad experiences with birds. I think she'll get better once she gets to know you. I understand, Fumikage waved him off. I know my face can intimidate children, so your concern is unnecessary. Still, I wanted to tell you that, Izuku assured him. Yuri's been through a lot and she spooks really easily, so don't feel bad, okay? I will keep that in mind. Izuku nodded, satisfied with his attempts to smooth things over with his classmate, and yanked his hood over his head before rushing out the door. Akito watched him go, sweat dropping. He wasn't kidding when he said he didn't want to leave Yuri alone for too long. He got changed faster than a professional stripper, Minoru added. Someone remind me to kill the grape later, Katsuki snapped as he put one of his grenade gauntlets on. Roger that, Ichiro smirked. Izuku blinked at Yuri, who was sitting in his lap, while the bus carried them to the training grounds. Yuri blinked back, but her eyes were focused on the two long protrusions on top of his costume's hood. She reached up and touched them at first, then gradually began to play with them in an attempt to figure out what they were. Mina didn't even try to hide the fact that she was sniggering. Someone's having fun playing with your bunny ears. They're not bunny ears, Izuku protested feebly, but his protest was duly noted and immediately disregarded by the little girls still playing with them. Hey Izuku. Tsuyu suddenly spoke up next to him. I always say what's on my mind, no matter what it is. I feel like I've seen you Quirk somewhere before. The boy flinched and smiled in a panic. Oh really, I don't think I've ever seen it elsewhere, though. If it's the fire you're talking about, that's all over the place, isn't it? Ijiro commented and held his arm up, using his quirk to harden his skin. There are tons of heroes with flame quirks. I'm kinda jealous of flashy quirks like that. My hardening is great and all for brawls, but it's not all that impressive visually. Izuku shook his head, admiring the hardening quirk. I think it's definitely pro-class. There's a ton you can do with a strong quirk like that. Ijiro shrugged, but he was still grinning from the compliment. Maybe, but heroes are also rated by their popularity, you know. Flashy quirks tend to do better with that kind of stuff. Yuga looked as smug as ever. My naval laser is pro-class in both power and flashiness. Mina smirked and put a hand on the other teen's shoulder. It sucks that you get a stomachache whenever you use it too much, though. Ijiro nodded towards the students sitting at the front of the bus. If we're talking about power and flashiness, then you can't forget Katsuki and Shoto, too. Shoto ignored that, but Katsuki spared them a brief glare and huffed before looking out the window. Sure, but Katsuki's always angry, Tsuyu said bluntly. So he'll never be that popular. Katsuki was on his feet instantly, ready to vault himself at the frog girl. What did you say? You wanna go? Tsuyu grinned and pointed at him. See? Denki smirked at the angry teen. You know, we basically just met you, so it kinda says something that we already know how crappy your personality is. You're gonna regret the day you applied to this school, you loser. Katsuki barked at him. Wow, 2 angry sentences without a single curse, Mina teased. I think that's a record. Katsuki's eyes bulged and his glare flashed to Izuku for an instant. Izuku lifted his hands to cover Yuri's ears. I'm gonna effing kill you bitches the instant we get back to combat training, you hear Katsuki snarled, letting little explosions pop off in his palms. No munchkin is gonna save you from getting your asses blown into MF oblivion. Didn't this munchkin just stop your cursing spree without so much as lifting a finger? Hanta laughed and pointed at Yuri, who was still completely occupied playing with Izuku's bunny ears. All of you, quiet down. Aizawa called to them before Katsuki could roar back. We're almost there. Upon arriving at the enormous training dome, which was dubbed USJ by UA's staff, the students met up with the Space Hero 13, and a trio of people dressed like heroes that Izuku didn't recognize. They didn't look much older than him, so he wondered if they were students. Sir? Tenyu raised his hand at the front of the group. Wasn't All Might supposed to meet us here? 13 turned towards him. Unfortunately, something came up and All Might won't be joining us today. Instead, we brought in some of your upperclassmen to help with the lesson. Aizawa stopped beside 13 and jerked his thumb at the trio of unknown heroes. These 3 are UA's top students, otherwise known as the Big 3 by the rest of the school. In other words, they're Japan's top hero candidates. Sorry we had to yank you 3 out of your exercise, but All Might was being irrational. No problem. The tallest of the 3, a young man with blonde hair arranged in a cowlick, replied with a thumbs up. His hero costume consisted of a large mask that covered his eyes and ears, a plated shirt with the number 1 million across his chest, black pants and boots with green trimmings, and a floor-length red orange cape. We're happy to help. The other male member of the Big 3, a dark-haired teenager with a hood and mask covering most of his face, didn't say anything and hardly looked happy, but he nodded. With his dark body armor and vest, he kind of reminded Izuku of a character from Assassin's Creed, except his hood extended into a cape. In contrast, the only female student of the big three was positively bubbling and bouncing with excitement. She had big blue eyes and very long, pale blue hair that reached down almost past her knees. Her hero costume was a light blue, green, and white skin-tight bodysuit, along with a pair of green and gold spiraling gauntlets, not unlike Katsuki's grenade gauntlets. In addition, 2 strands of her own hair had been twisted atop her head to resemble spiraled horns. "So these are juniors," she exclaimed, her eyes flashing from one student to the next faster than they could comprehend. "Oh, I've got so many things I want to know about them." 13's sweat dropped. "They're the same as ever, huh?" The blonde teen grinned back at the space hero reassuringly. "Don't worry about it, 13. I'll get," Aizawa grunted. "First things first." The pro trailed off and stiffened, twisting his head suddenly to look at the fountain not far away below them. In front of it, a spark of black matter appeared and began to engorge, growing in size. From within it, a hand appeared, followed by a body. The face belonging to it was covered by another, severed, hand. As the portal grew, more bodies came out until a whole horde of people had emerged. 13. Aizawa snapped, covering his eyes with his goggles. "Protect the students." Ejiro spotted the group of people below them and frowned. "What's that? Is this like the entrance exam where it's already started?" "Don't move," Mirio barked, startling the teens. He clenched his fists, glaring down at the intruders. "Those guys aren't supposed to be here. They're villains." Tamaki muttered a curse under his breath. Why didn't the alarm system go off? Nejire was counting them with her finger. "I wonder if they have someone who can interfere with electronics." "That's probably the case," Aizawa muttered, taking hold of his silver capture scarf. "Mirio and I will engage them. 13, Tamaki, and Nejire. I'm counting on you to protect my students. Get them out of here and alert the others." 13 nodded. "Be careful. This isn't some random ambush. To show up when they did, where they did, this was definitely planned. There's some objective behind it all." Aizawa and Mirio dove towards the oncoming crowd of villains, and began to wreak havoc amongst their ranks. Izuku could see Aizawa using his quirk to shut down the villains as he went and stunned them in groups, but he couldn't tell what Mirio was doing. The guy just seemed to pop up from nowhere and beat villains into unconsciousness in an instant. "Izuku." He jerked back to attention as Tenya grabbed his shoulder. "We have to go." Izuku nodded and knelt to pick up the girl clinging tightly to his hand. "Come on, Eri." The class made for the door, but they stopped dead when black mist materialized in front of them, blocking the exit. In a mere moment, the same villain who had let the others in was in their way. 13 and Nejire got in front of the class while Tamaki took the rear. Their postures were taut, ready to fight at an instant's notice. "I'm afraid I can't allow you to leave." A pair of glowing, slit eyes formed in the fog above a metal plate of some kind and leered down at them. His voice just seemed to emanate from the fog. "Greetings. We are the League of Villains. I apologize for the intrusion, but we took it upon ourselves to enter UA and engage All Might. We have come so that the symbol of peace may draw his last breath." The glowing eyes studied the students below him, some quivering in fear, others in rage. "I was under the impression that All Might was supposed to attend this class, was he not? Has something been altered?" Izuku had taken the few seconds the villain had spoken and studied him as best he could in that brief span. He'd appeared out of nowhere, emerging from a point in space of his choosing. But it hadn't been instantaneous. His quirk was in teleportation. Given the time it took for him to shift through space, the fact that he could transport other people, and his general appearance, he felt confident that the villain's quirk was warping. His body itself was probably the gate, which made it tricky to pick an attack point, but Izuku guessed that his actually physical body was concealed beneath all that fog. The metal plate looked awfully in line with his eyes, and Izuku imagined it was his torso. That was probably his weak point, which was why it was armored. That error served as a coordinate point, so he didn't accidentally warp part of his body off. He didn't have the time to analyze it further. "Hit the part of him inside that steel plate," Izuku shouted, interrupting any further words the villain may have wanted to say. "It's his weak point." The glowing eyes whitened slightly. "Oh, impressive. As expected of a golden egg." One of 13's finger guards popped off. "Good eye, young man." The vortex of all-consuming suction began to tear at the mass of fog, sucking it and anything else into the oblivion of 13's black hole. "NGH." The villain's eyes narrowed again as he tried to resist the pull, but then his voice rumbled low and deep. "I think not." Suddenly, the gate opened up directly behind 13, causing the suction of the black hole to tear apart his back. The pro cried out in pain and stopped his quirk before he destroyed himself. 13. Mina cried, panicking. "Quite the formidable quirk," the villain muttered. "But now that it's out of the way, I can do my duty. That is, to scatter and torture you all to death." The fog was suddenly covering everything and everyone, drawing them into a twisting void that threw off all sense of balance, and turned space into a black abyss. Izuku didn't have time to call out for his screaming classmates, as he was too focused on keeping Eri in his arms, so that they didn't get separated. Then they were falling. Izuku's eyes widened as he saw a street drawing ever closer, and a quick glance made him realize they'd been teleported into the Inferno Zone. All the buildings around them were on fire and parts of the street as well. He twisted so that he'd land on his feet and clutched Eri close. "It's okay, Eri. Just hold on." He landed a bit roughly, but rolled with the impact and came out of it sitting down. Izuku immediately looked down at the girl in his arms. "Eri, are you hurt?" Eri looked up at him, her eyes wide and rimmed with tears. She was frightened, perhaps even more than when he'd found her. "Izuku, I'm scared." "I've got you," he promised, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "Don't worry, I'll protect you. I'll get you and everyone else out of here." Easier said than done, he mentally snapped to himself. How did they get in here? And they want to kill All Might. That should be impossible, unless they have a way to get around One for All. He frowned at that. It sounded crazy when one considered that All Might was literally the strongest hero in the world, but even so, no Quirk was completely invulnerable. He spent so much time researching All Might's quirk before he met the man that he knew several ways it could be stopped, though he'd never actually seen those theories of his tested. These villains were clever. They knew that All Might was supposed to be here. Suddenly, he wondered if the press invasion the day before had something to do with this. Had the villains provided the news with a chance to get inside and taken advantage of the chaos to get their hands on a class schedule or something? Assuming they'd gone to all that trouble, it only made sense that they planned for a way to deal with All Might's quirk. If that was true. He shook his head. He could think about that later. His priority now was to get Eri out of here and alert the rest of the teachers. UA was a literal fortress holding many pro-heroes. Those same pros would be able to pulverize all the villains here. Oh, looks like that foggy guy gave us our first catch of the day. Izuku jerked his head up to look further down the street and realized that there were villains closing in around them. He looked over his shoulder and grit his teeth. They were behind him, too. Eri whimpered and tried to hide in his chest. "What? It's just some wannabe hero and a little kid," one of the villains exclaimed. "Ugh, well they can warm us up until we get a shot at killing All Might. Let's put them on the barbecue." "That's my line," Izuku retorted, feeling rage surge through him at the sound of Eri crying again. No child deserved to be terrified like this, but Eri was going through it for the second time in 24 hours, and it was making him so angry he could barely think straight. He held her close with one arm and extended the other towards the closest burning building, letting emerald flames flicker to life around his fist. "I don't know if you guys have some plan to take on All Might or not, but you definitely didn't do enough research. You don't know the quirks of us students, do you? So what? You're just a kid," another villain sneered. "You're as good as dead." "Don't be scared, Eri," Izuku murmured lowly to her. The flames from the building he reached for flooded towards him, startling the villains and making them freeze in their tracks, as Izuku's green fire consumed and transmuted the conflagration. In a matter of seconds, the two of them were surrounded by a swirling torrent of raging emerald fire. "I promised, right? I'll protect you. No one is ever gonna hurt you again." He thrust his hand out, propelling the ring of fire away in a rapid burst. The blast consumed the villains surrounding them and sent them flying away with screams of pain. Emerald flames burned at them and began to devour any other nearby flames that they could reach, enhancing Izuku's power and giving him more fire to work with. The villains were thrown aside like rag dolls, smashing into the street or the sides of burning buildings. Most of them were knocked unconscious, and those that were so dazed that they could do nothing. No, the villains didn't this through all the way, Izuku thought, baring his teeth. They don't know the quirks of the students. If they did, they never would have sent me into the Inferno Zone. I'm stronger here than anywhere else in USJ. He stood up, still holding Eri to him, and called his flames back, making sure that they were wreathed around him and Eri in a protective ring. Izuku couldn't flare up his whole body without burning Eri, so this mobile shield was the next best thing he could come up with. Fortunately, he was able to spread one for all over him to improve his speed and agility. "Let's get you out of here," Izuku told Eri. "I've got a plan. That foggy guy is probably still guarding the door. There's not going to be a way out over there. But that's fine." Izuku ran for the nearest wall of the dome, gathering more flames up into his arsenal on the way until they were the eye of a literal storm of emerald fire. Once the wall was in sight, he called to Eri over the roar of the flames. "Hold on tight." Their small arms wrapped around his neck in a death grip, but Izuku could live without oxygen for a few seconds. Still holding her with his left arm, he brought his right back and clenched it into a fist, summoning all his flames to consume his arm from the elbow down. He hadn't used this move since he first trained with All Might and never on this scale, for the fiery fist he created was many times larger and looked a lot rougher, since he barely had the control to condense so much fire into one spot, but it was his best shot at cracking the wall open with his first try. "I'll make my own door. All flare. 5% Detroit smash." Izuku punched at the wall with all the flame he gathered and one for all alight in his fist, blowing apart a 10-foot section of concrete apart. He winced at the impact it had on his own hand, but he didn't think he'd broken anything. He rushed through and emerged on the outside of the dome, still keeping his flames closed in case a villain caught onto them. Alright, we're out. He gasped, running for the street. If he could just get to UA and tell the teachers what was happening. Suddenly, a surge of darkness covered his vision, and Izuku's eyes widened with horror as he realized the warping villain had somehow caught them. Fool, the villain sounded incredibly smug. Did you think I would just hover around the door? This is outside of the game's boundaries. Go back inside and die, please. They were falling again before Izuku could do anything, but he dragged his flames through with him and emerged, tumbling on the ground with a yelp. He rose to one knee and glanced up, only to freeze when he realized where they were. Smack dab in the middle of USJ, surrounded by villains who were currently engaging Mirio. Although he seemed to have the advantage, what horrified Izuku was the current state of Eraserhead. A huge black humanoid had pinned him to the ground and was snapping the bones in his arms, as though they were toothpicks. Behind the beast was the first villain who had emerged, the one covered in severed hands. The apparent boss, the villain covered with hands, turned to look at Izuku and Eri as they emerged from the warp portal. It was impossible to see his face because of the hand covering it up, but Izuku got a chilling feeling that he was grinning with malicious delight. Oh, Quirk sent me a present, the villain began to walk towards them. I'll get bonus points if I crush All Might's pride before killing him. Time to die, little hero. Izuku bared his teeth, gathered up his flames, and launched them at the villain with a desperate scream. The blast Izuku launched at the villain was packed with all the flame he had available to him. A river of fire surged towards the enemy, a man covered in severed hands, but he lunged to one side and evaded the attack. Izuku immediately recalled his flames and moved them close to him and Eri, ready to attack at the next sign of danger. The villain stared at the roaring emerald fire, but with his face covered, only his voice could express his annoyance. Kurogiri, would you bring this one? I can't kill him if I can't touch him. And now there's fire all over the place. Forgive me, Tomoura, the warping villain materialized next to his leader, glowing eyes fixed on the teenager encircled by the fire. I caught him trying to escape and attempted to remove him, but it seems he's presenting more of a problem than I initially assumed. Ugh, Tomoura snarled and scratched at his neck. Long-range Quirk users are such a pain in the ass. But what's up with that little brat he's got? I do not know. But for her to be at UA, under the protection of all these heroes, means she's likely of some importance. I see. Tomoura lunged at the pair of children, targeting the little girl hiding in her protector's arms. He didn't look like it, but the villain could rush with surprising speed when he wanted to. Before anyone could react, he was right in front of the pair and reaching for Eri. The lips hiding behind his hand mask curled up in a sadistic smile. I want to kill this one. His hand extended, just inches away from Eri's shoulder. As soon as all 5 of his fingers touched her, she would be dust. Death. Tomoura suddenly found himself leaping back, reacting purely on his instincts, screaming out to get away. A roar of emerald fire consumed the space he'd been in a moment before, and chased after him relentlessly, until he was out of Izuku's range. The villain skidded to a stop and regarded the teen with irritation. Izuku had one hand thrust out, still clutching Eri tightly to him. That hand had directed the fire, but it had also been charging up one for all to full power, in case he had to shatter the villain before he could touch Eri. His eyes glared at Tomoura through his mask, emanating a sense of deadly calm. Tomoura felt the skin on his neck prickle as he looked back at the teen. He grinned as he glanced down and saw goosebumps on his arms. That's some nice killing intent you've got there, Tomoura said mockingly. But ain't that contradictory for a hero? Heroes are supposed to help people, not kill them. You're such a hypocrite. Shut up, Izuku's voice belied the anger he was barely keeping in line. You're not getting near her. If you touch even a hair on her head, you'll regret it. He wasn't bluffing. Tomoura could see it in his eyes and chuckled. I believe you, little rabbit. Are you unharmed, Tomoura? Kurogiri again appeared beside his leader. More or less, Tomoura held up his right hand, the one he tried to grab Eri with. He had been caught by the flames, but only enough to leave a minor singe on his fingers. You brought me a good one, Kurogiri. The warping villain looked at Izuku cautiously. He's got an impressive quirk. His reaction time is notable as well. Tomoura was focused on the emerald fire swirling around the teenager. Now that he backed off and really took a look at it, this quirk seemed an awful lot like another one he'd heard about before. He's way faster than he looks. That was too close. Izuku didn't take his eyes off of the 2 villains just outside of his range. The warping one was trouble, but the guy covered in severed hands had made his hair stand on end. Whatever his quirk was, Izuku had a feeling it would be bad news if he touched them. He'd reacted with as much ferocity as he could to protect Eri from the villain, and even then had barely made it in time. His eyes darted towards the hulking black humanoid, keeping Eraserhead's broken form pinned down. That thing was going to be a problem if it could cause so much damage to a pro hero, but Izuku was going to be preoccupied with these guys before he could act to save his teacher and... He jumped as a head appeared out of the ground and swiped at it reflexively, but his hand just passed right through it. Izuku blinked as Mirio emerged from the dirt in front of him, sweating, but unharmed. Easy there, freshman, Mirio set a hand on Izuku's shoulder. You okay? I'm fine, Izuku nodded, tracing his eyes back to Tomura and Kurogiri. They were still watching the heroes in training, but had yet to make another move. How do we handle this? Mirio turned so he was facing the pair of villains as well. He made short work of the small fry, but he could tell these other guys would be more of a problem to deal with. Normally I'd tell you to run for the door, but that guy with the warp quirk is going to make that impossible. His buddy is an even bigger problem. I've only gotten a quick look at his quirk during the fighting, but from what I can tell, he can disintegrate whatever he touches. It's not instantaneous, but if he holds on long enough, he'll probably turn you into dust. Izuku gulped, but that knowledge was vital, and he could use it. Disintegration upon touching someone. His quirk is similar to Iri's, but from a comparative standpoint, it's a lot weaker. If he can disintegrate someone instantly like Iri can, his attacks can be avoided even if he makes contact. But even so, that's a really dangerous quirk. We've gotta be careful. Izuku bit his lip as he considered his opponents. Close-range combat was a no-go here. From the looks of things, Mirio was a close combat type, but Izuku didn't know much about his quirk, other than that he could phase through objects. He glanced around. Eraserhead wasn't going to last much longer at this rate, and he could only hope that one of his classmates would escape yesterday, while they were keeping the warp villain busy. Fortunately, he had a lot of fire to work with. Izuku had managed to drag almost all of the flames he collected from the Inferno Zone with him when Kurogiri caught him mid-air. Mirio suddenly thumped his shoulder, getting the teen's attention. His upperclassman stood up and dusted himself off. You stay here and keep the little princess safe, okay? I'll handle these guys. Izuku protested. You can't beat them alone. Mirio grinned and gave him a thumbs up. No worries. Just sit back and watch, freshman. He lunged towards the black creature pinning Aizawa, half falling into the ground, so he could propel himself with his quirk. Gotta get Eraserhead out of there. If he gets hurt much more, he'll die. The black portal opened up in front of him as Kurogiri attempted to block him. I won't let you. Mirio only smirked and let his entire body phase, going right through the warp gate and out the other side to reach his target. What? Kurogiri exclaimed in disbelief. He's just a kid, but he's way more annoying than Eraserhead was, Tomura growled, thoroughly irritated. Have a taste of this. Mirio shouted, punching at the beast in a blur of motion, and striking him in a circle. He hit it with all he had in its back, gut, face, and neck, in an effort to knock it out as quickly as possible. Mirio didn't have superhuman strength, but his body had been trained to the utmost, and it normally took just one shot to knock out an average man. But this guy was different. He was able to tell from the moment his fist collided with the beast's face, and felt the impact diffuse harmlessly. Mirio kept striking, trying to find a weak point, but there was none to be found. Tomura was finally annoyed enough to leave Eraserhead where he lay. The pro would probably die soon, anyway. Naomu, get that guy away from you. Naomu suddenly swatted at Mirio in an incredible blur of speed, but Mirio had phased the moment the words got out of Tomura's mouth. He narrowly avoided what might have been a fatal blow, as the shockwave from that one strike sent a blast of air far away. Mirio let himself phase into the ground and propelled himself back towards Izuku, skidding to a stop as he processed what he'd learned from the exchange. I see. Physical attacks won't have any effect on this guy. Oh, you figured that out. Tomura sounded smug this time. That's because of Naomu's shock absorption. You can beat him all you want, but it won't do anything. The best way to hurt him would be to slowly gouge out his flesh. Whether he'll actually let you do that or not is another matter. Shock absorption. Izuku muttered. He glanced at Mirio. I need you to take Iri. No? She gasped, looking up at Izuku desperately. Don't go. Mirio didn't take his eyes off the villains. What for? We can't beat that guy down with physical attacks. My fire is the only thing we have that can hurt him. Izuku stood up and gently pried Iri off of him despite her protests. Shock absorption won't help him with fire. That's pretty risky. He's too fast for you to keep up with, Mirio replied, gritting his teeth in frustration. They were in a tight spot, he knew. But we don't have much other choice. He's too fast for us to get away from, and my quirk can't do anything against this guy. Fine. I'll keep Iri safe from these guys, but don't do anything too risky. I'll be careful, Izuku promised, passing Iri to Mirio. She struggled, but couldn't get away from the older teen. Izuku. Iri cried out, trying to reach for him. Izuku started walking towards Naomu, bringing his flames around him. There wasn't time to be afraid. If he didn't go full throttle, this guy would beat him in an instant. No one else was around besides Mirio and Iri. No one else would be able to tell what his quirk really was. The bunny ears would hide his horns, just like he designed them to. Iri's screams made his blood boil with rage. It's okay, Iri. Everything will be alright. I'm here. The emerald flames around him surged up, enveloping his body from head to toe, and generating a roar like a jet engine. The two protrusions atop his head became encased in fire and spiked up. A malicious grin formed on Tomura's face. Oh, I thought he was some cute rabbit, but now, he looks more like a devil. Izuku lunged at Naomu, channeling one for all through his body to augment his speed. The beast turned to face him, but it wouldn't move until Tomura gave it orders. Kurogiri glanced at his leader when said orders didn't come. Tomura, is something wrong? I want it, Tomura hissed under his breath. Izuku gathered a mass of flames along both his arms, and clapped them together to grab Naomu with fire hands. Green fire enveloped the beast's upper body, burning its flesh. Naomu groaned lowly to express pain at the attack. It forgot about Aizawa completely and focused its attention on the teenager, but still didn't react without Tomura's permission. Now I remember, Tomura's grin widened beneath the hand covering his face. Teacher told me that he had a pet like this once. One with those green flames. I want it, Kurogiri. I want the rabbit. Kurogiri considered that. I can capture him, but as long as he can use those flames, he's a danger to us wherever we take him. You'll have to weaken him first. It's like Pokemon, huh? Tomura snickered. A shiny appeared and I gotta weaken it without killing it. Luckily, my legendary knows full swipe. Something's not right, Izuku thought. Naomu was still groaning as though it were in pain, but the fire didn't seem to be doing any actual damage. He stared at the beast through the flames and froze when he spotted the burning flesh healing over. Naomu's super regeneration is keeping him from getting a burn status, Tomura laughed. He was designed specifically to take All Might on at 100%. Little moves like that won't hurt much. Naomu, don't kill him. Catch him. Izuku leapt back, firing a stream of flame at Naomu to prevent it from charging him, but he was too close, and his flames didn't do enough damage to the beast. He felt an incredible impact strike his upper chest and a massive hand enclosed around his neck, then he was slammed into the ground with such force that he blacked out. Nuo! Eri screamed. Mirio swore under his breath. This was really bad. He couldn't leave the area, but Izuku was in trouble, and Eraserhead was probably going to die if he wasn't taken out of here fast. Is there nothing I can do? Kurogiri, catch him, Tomura ordered. Kurogiri began to form a warp gate, but he was stopped by a roar of fury and a sudden explosion. The pair of villains barely evaded the surprise attack and leapt away, leaving one Katsuki Bakugo between them, Izuku, and Naomu. Ijiro was right behind him, along with Nejire, Tsuyu, and Minoru. Tomura's eyes narrowed. More fodder. The hell did you call me? Katsuki roared, letting explosions pop off in his palms. You're dead. But you first, you foggy bastard. You get the death sentence for chucking me into a pile of concrete. He's a troublesome one, Kurogiri decided. Did they already defeat our underlings? Ain't just them. Approaching from the landslide zone, Kyuka appeared with Momo, Shoto, Dinky, and Tamaki close behind her. There was a bunch of them, but all you sent after us were wimps. Tamaki already took out that guy you brought to block our communications. UA knows we're in trouble. I got Toru out too, in case we weren't able to send a distress call, Shoto added. What? I was keeping an eye out for anyone trying to escape. Kurogiri denied the claim. Shoto smirked. I wonder if you can see someone who's invisible. They took out our henchmen so easily, Tomura clasped his hands together. To top it off, they're barely hurt at all. Kids these days are amazing, they're making the League of Villains look bad. And if they've already sent a distress call, the pros will be here in no time. Ah, well. If it was just All Might, we could win, but we aren't specialized enough to deal with the others. Game over, I guess. Tomura sighed, but then perked up. But we get a consolation prize. I captured the rabbit. So as a gift for our beloved symbol of peace, let's kill as many of these guys as we can. Boom. Just then, the glass of the dome above them shattered and a blur shot down, hitting the ground with tremendous force. A wave of dust and debris covered the area for a few moments, giving the stunned figures who had been closest to the impact to regain their bearings. It was it that attacked my students. A deep voice sent shivers down the spines of everyone there, but the students felt a sense of elation run through them at the same time. Heavy footsteps purposely stomped the ground, sending tremors out. It was it that hurt them. A shock of blonde hair made itself visible as the dust began to settle. Tomura's eyes widened in glee. You will regret it. The scowl on his face was a far cry from his usual wide grin, but the symbol of peace looked far more terrifying for it, as he glared through glowing eyes at Tomura and Kurogiri. Everything's alright now. I am here. All Might. Kurogiri's eyes narrowed cautiously. So he came, after all. Tomura grinned. He really came. This works out perfectly. You won't be getting out of this alive, Mr. Symbol of Peace. Naomu's been specially designed to take you on at your best. I'd like to see you try to overcome super regeneration and shock absorption at the same time. All Might took stock of his surroundings, but stopped dead upon seeing Izuku pinned beneath Naomu's huge hands. He lunged at the black beast. Release him. Tomura cackled. Naomu, get him. Naomu began to turn his attention to All Might, but a sudden blaze of fire enveloped him, preventing All Might from getting too close and regaining the beast's interest. Izuku was fighting through the pain of a shattered collarbone, and he could barely move, but he knew that letting Naomu fight All Might was a disaster waiting to happen, and he wouldn't let it come to pass. He's got shock absorption and super regeneration. He's the perfect counter to All Might. I can't let them fight. All Might's already used up a lot of his time today. Tomoura's eye twitched in annoyance. The shiny's still awake. Naomu, knock him out good this time. Choke him. He wanted to scream as the pressure of Naomu's hand closed around his throat and pressed hard on his broken collarbone, but Izuku grabbed at the beast's wrist with vicious tenacity, and let his flames blaze wildly, determined not to let this thing get a shot at All Might. When he couldn't hold back the urge to scream anymore, Izuku bit down hard on Naomu's finger. Izuku. Izuku. Eri was screaming, struggling to get free from Mirio. Izuku flashed a glance at her and blanched when he saw that her horn was sparking with energy. He couldn't call out to warn Mirio with Naomu squeezing the air from his lungs. Let me go. He glared at Naomu and drove the intensity and heat of his flames as high as he could tolerate, and then desperately pushed it beyond that. The emerald flames roared wildly as the temperature soared and formed a core of white-hot energy at the center of the conflagration, where Naomu was still trying to choke out Izuku. Let me go, 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 let me go. And Naomu let him go. Izuku sucked in a gulp of air as soon as the beast's grip loosened and screamed. Mirio let Eri go. Mirio was startled by the scream and did what Izuku asked on reflex, releasing the girl. Eri stumbled in an effort to get away from him, and the energy coalescing around her horn flared up violently, but nothing was vaporized this time. She regained her footing, tears rolling down her cheeks as she ran towards Izuku. Eri, don't, Izuku choked out, but the burning pain in his collarbone had spread all over, and he couldn't get out anything more than that, before he fainted again. His flames completely vanished in a quick burst, leaving him defenseless. He wouldn't be able to avoid capture this time, Tomoura said confidently. Naomu, get All Might. But nothing happened. Tomoura frowned and looked at the black hulking beast in confusion. Naomu. Boo. Naomu made a low, barely audible groan, as he stumbled away from Izuku's prone form. Tomoura froze as he realized that Naomu's flesh was not black because of his skin, but because it had all turned to ash. Naomu lifted his hands and pawed at his eyes, which had been baked into nothingness. And when he tried to touch his face, his hands crumbled into dust. They had been at the hottest point of the conflagration, since they'd been touching Izuku, and had gotten burned down to the bone. Naomu slumped to the ground a moment later with a thump, and did not rise again. Mirio's eyes were huge. He won. Izuku. Eri rushed to his side and reached for him, but she yelped when Shoto, who had run over at the same time, stopped her. Don't touch him. Shoto warned her, creating some ice to press against Izuku's skin. It immediately hissed and evaporated in an instant. He overheated and can't regulate his body temperature. You'll get burned. Izuku's body was actually steaming from the horrific temperatures he generated. His heat resistance only went so far, and it seemed that he pushed that limit too far, leaving shiny red burns over his hands and arms. His face looked like it had been badly sunburned, and it was only visible because his flames had burned away a large section of his mask and hood. Eri bit her lip, falling to her knees beside Izuku's unconscious form. Izuku. Shoto used his ice to cool off Izuku's body, but his mind was reeling from shock. I knew he had a flame quirk, but he just carbonized that guy's cells before they could regenerate. The only other person who I know can do that is that old bastard. Izuku can generate flames as hot as his. What the hell? Tomoura hissed out through gritted teeth and scratched at his throat furiously until he left bloody furrows. He got a critical hit. He shouldn't be able to move anymore. Ugh, I hate games where they can still fight back at full power, even when they've only got 1 HP. He let his hands drop and snarled. There's no catching him now. No consolation prize for us. We can't beat their legendary without Naomu. Game over, Kurogiri. Kurogiri nodded. It's best we beat a hasty retreat before the other pros arrive. Oh, no, you don't. Katsuki snarled, pointing one of his gauntlets at them, and pulling the pin. Die. Mirio shouted a warning, but it was too late. Don't do it. Kurogiri immediately opened a warp gate to intercept the huge explosion. Fool. The explosion passed straight through the gate and opened up right next to Kyoka's group, who were tending to Aizawa's broken form. They barely had time to glance at the opening portal before Katsuki's explosion ripped through them. No? Nejire gasped. It's okay. She and the rest of her group spun around to find All Might there with all 5 of the would-be victims safely in his huge arms. I've got them. Unfortunately, while All Might was busy saving them, Kurogiri opened up another gate that he and Tomoura escaped through. Tomoura glared at All Might as he vanished through the gate. Enjoy your win, All Might. This isn't over. I'll kill you. And then they were gone, leaving behind the critically injured Naomu. Tamaki sighed in relief. Those were the bosses, right? Yeah, Mirio replied, walking over to his friend. But there are other students still missing. There are probably still some villains around, as well. They brought a ton of them here. All Might carefully set down Kyoka and the others, taking special care with the heavily wounded Aizawa. I will deal with the remaining villains. Young Mirio, Tamaki, and Nejire, I'm counting on you 3 to get everyone here to the other pros. They should be here soon. Make sure young Izuku and Mr. Aizawa are taken to Recovery Girl immediately for treatment. 13 was badly hurt too, Nejire told him. He was warped away with the others, but I haven't seen him. I'll find him, All Might promised, falling into a crouch. Leave it to me. All Might launched himself into the air then, flying towards the nearest zone to search for whoever he could. Mirio walked over to Izuku, Eri, and Shoto, the latter of which was still cooling off the burned teenager. Can we move him? Shoto used his left hand, the one with heat-resistant properties, to touch Izuku's skin carefully. He was still pretty warm, but he wasn't so hot that he'd burn someone now. Shoto nodded. His temperature's gone down a lot. We can move him. Eri immediately crawled over to Izuku and took his warm hand in hers, squeezing it tightly. Is Izuku gonna be okay? He'll be fine, Mirio promised. Recovery girl will take good care of him. Now let's get him out of here. Eri sniffled and tried to wipe her eyes, but she was still crying. Okay. 16, 17, 18, not counting the kid with the broken collarbone, everyone was pretty much unharmed. The detective in charge of removing the villains from UA announced to Class 1A, with a sigh of relief. The police were currently escorting the villains out of USJ and into police vehicles, where they would be taken to prison. The students had done a great job fighting their attackers off, and All Might had laid waste to the rest of them upon arriving. His wrath had been something to see, assuming you could keep up with him, blitzing around USJ in blurs of motion, and knocking out villains by the dozen faster than you could blink. The detective cleared his throat to get the attention of the class. For now, you all need to go back to the classroom. This isn't the time or place for police questioning. Tsuyu held up a finger to her lips. Hey, detective. How's Mr. Ozawa doing? He's in critical condition at the hospital, the man admitted. His arms were shattered and his face suffered fractures all over. The bones around his eye socket, the orbital floor, have been crushed into a powder. It might adversely affected his eyesight, but thankfully, there was no brain damage. And 13. His back and upper arms sustained severe lacerations, but his vitals are stable, and it's expected that he'll make a full recovery. Ichako couldn't stop herself and let the question bubbling in her throat burst out. What about Deku? Deku? She means Izuku, Mina told him, frowning worriedly. Is he okay? The detective blinked in understanding and nodded. Ah, yeah, he's with Recovery Girl. His injuries weren't so bad that he had to go to the hospital. She'll be able to heal him completely once he wakes up and regains some of his energy. Dinky let out a tense breath. Whew, what a relief. I thought he was dead when that Namu guy started choking him out. You all did a great job. That was Mirio as he, Nejire, and Tamaki walked over to them. They'd been helping the police with the villains since they already had hero licenses, but their job was done now. Mirio smiled widely at his juniors. You freshmen pack a real punch. A bunch of these guys are still dizzy from the beating you gave them. All Might knocked out most of them, you know, Tamaki muttered lowly. Katsuki had been unusually quiet since they'd been evacuated and kept clenching and unclenching his fists. Ijiro noticed something was up and nudged the volatile teen lightly with his elbow. You good, man? I'm fine, Katsuki shrugged him off with a growl. I'm just pissed that damn nerd almost got himself killed. He ain't allowed to die. Mina's eyelid twitched with annoyance at his rough words. Can't you act nicely for just one? It's okay, Mina, Ijiro interrupted her, shaking his head. Katsuki only huffed and started stalking for the bus that would take them back to UA. He wasn't in the mood to give Mina a piece of his mind, or so he told himself. Ijiro sighed. He says that, but I'm sure he's even more worried about Izuku than the rest of us. Izuku woke up blearily and blinked the sleepiness from his eyes. There was a sort of light ache all over his body, and he felt more exhausted than he could ever remember being before. His thought process was so sluggish that he hadn't yet recalled what had happened when Recovery Girl appeared by his bedside. Oh good, you're awake, she smiled at him gently. You were out like a light for a couple of hours. I was, what? Izuku blinked in confusion, and suddenly all the memories of USJ came rushing back. His eyes widened, but before he could open his mouth, Recovery Girl held her hands up. Everyone is okay, she assured him. All Might saved everyone after he arrived. Aizawa and 13 are getting medical attention at the hospital, and they're both expected to recover. None of the other students were hurt. Izuku ran that through his head before another worry made itself known. What about Eri? Where is she? The Recovery Girl chuckled and gestured to his bed. Take a look. Izuku looked down and realized that Eri was hugging his left arm, though she was sleeping deeply. She still had tear stains on her cheeks, but other than that she looked peaceful. She wasn't hurt. You protected her, just like she said you would, Recovery Girl told him. That little girl didn't leave your side the whole time. Her quirk didn't flare up again? He asked, using his right hand to wipe away the tear stains on her face, before he smoothed her hair back gently. No? Mirio told me what happened, but luckily no one was harmed, the nurse replied. Do you know what a quirk does? Izuku bit his lip. I think so, but I have to tell All Might about it. In that case, it's a good thing I'm here. He almost yelled at the familiar voice and looked up to spot All Might sitting on a stool at the foot of his bed. He was in his true form and sat beside a police detective in a trench coat. Both men looked amused by Izuku's surprise. Izuku sighed and put a hand over his heart. You scared me. Sorry, kiddo, All Might apologized. He leaned forward and grinned at the teenager. I can see you're still pretty groggy, but we should get this out of the way as soon as possible. This is Namasa Tsukauchi. He's a police detective and one of my best friends. He came today to take custody of the villains, but his initial purpose was to speak with you, Yun Katsuki, and myself about what happened last night during the confrontation with Iri's kidnapper. I'll make this pretty quick, Tsukauchi promised, waving Izuku down as the boy straightened in his bed. No, lay down. Recovery girl would have my head if I made you get up. And don't you forget it. The old woman warned him good-naturedly. The detective chuckled. All Might and Katsuki already gave me their testimony about what happened the other night. We know the gist of what happened, but I also have to get your perspective of the event. We can save the SJ testimony for another time since you're currently recovering from a serious injury. Izuku nodded a bit nervously. Okay. Tsukauchi's questions were short, simple, and to the point. Izuku confirmed that the villain had been the one to initiate the fight, and that he'd done his best only to act in self-defense, so that he could protect Iri from her kidnapper. There were a few other basic questions: how Katsuki had acted when he arrived, and what the villain had done to try and get Iri back, but it was all pretty cut and dry. Tsukauchi scribbled down the last of his notes for the testimony and nodded. And we're done. But I'd like to hear what you were going to say about Iri's quirk. I understand that it flared up at USJ. We'll need to know what it is so we can inform the appropriate foster care she's taken to after this. I don't think it's a good idea for her to go with someone else right now, Izuku told Tsukauchi, shooting him an apologetic look. I'm sorry, but I don't think it'll be safe for Iri. She'll be well cared for, the investigator assured Izuku. She'll have police protection as well. I don't mean protection from whoever took Iri, I mean from herself, Izuku said. Her quirks flared up twice today, at USJ and earlier when Fumikage scared her on accident. All Might raised an eyebrow. You didn't mention that earlier at lunch. Sorry, I was just trying to figure out how to best explain what I saw, he apologized meekly. But I spent a long time thinking about it and I think I know what it is. And? What is it? Izuku looked down at Iri and ran his fingers through her hair, swallowing hard. Molecular disintegration. She can instantaneously break down an object at the molecular level, as long as she's touching it, while her quirk is active. That silence met his hypothesis. Tsukauchi looking incredulous. Are you serious? I only saw it once, but I'm pretty sure that's it, Izuku nodded stiffly. She was touching a tree when her quirk flared up the first time, and it just vanished. Not shrunk, not turned invisible, just gone. Completely. Leaves, bark, roots, everything. And when her quirk started going out of control, she was crying for me to let her go. In that moment, I got this feeling that if I didn't let her go, I would have died. That'll be your body instinctively reacting to danger, All Might said, his face grim. Molecular disintegration. Even amongst pros, a quirk like that, the only person even remotely similar is 13, and this phenomenon is much different even then. There's more, Izuku went on. She told me she didn't want to hurt me, but it might be just speculation on my part, but I got the impression that she might have accidentally used her quirk on a person before. If it had just manifested and someone went to pick her up or touch her, she would instantly kill them on contact, Tsukauchi finished, sighing. Well, this case gets more complicated by the second. That's not the kind of quirk we can just ask a quirk counselor to a foster home to handle. If she panics like she did earlier, she'll vaporize anyone who doesn't understand how to deal with her. Izuku nodded. She told me that she was cursed. That the bird people, the villains who kidnapped her, were right, and she would always hurt people. I didn't want her to feel so hopeless and scared of her own power, so I talked to her about All Flare. He glanced at Tsukauchi nervously, but the man only smiled. I'm aware of it, but don't worry. All Might is a friend of mine and he's told me that you're a good kid. So far, I'm rather inclined to believe him. Izuku relaxed somewhat. I didn't go into details, but I said that my quirk scared and hurt a lot of people before. I just wanted her to know that she wasn't alone and that we could help her. She needed to know that she'll be okay. All Might smiled at the teenager with approval. Well said. Yes, I agree with you. Children, especially those who have gone through trauma of some kind, often feel calmer around someone who they can relate to and expect to guide them. Seeing as she feels safest around you to begin with, I think it would be best if she stayed with you and your mother. Of course, we'll have to ask your mother about this, but if she can't stay at home with you, I think it would be possible for her to stay at UA and see you every day. It would keep her happy, calm, and we could work on her quirk safely. That's the kind of environment she needs right now. You make some pretty valid points, Tsukauchi admitted, standing up. Very well, I'll inform the department about this. For now, your mother, and All Might need to hash out where Iri will be staying for the time being. Also, Izuku. The boy blinked as Tsukauchi glanced from him to Iri, and then to Recovery Girl. You need to find a way for Iri to provide Recovery Girl with a blood sample. It's possible that her parents are searching for her somewhere, but we'll never know without a DNA test to go off of. I understand that she's terrified of needles, so would you mind helping Recovery Girl with that, as soon as Eri is comfortable again? The sooner, the better. Izuku nodded. I'll do my best, but I won't rush her. Sorry. Don't apologize, Tsukauchi smiled at him reassuringly. We won't rush her, but it is a priority. For now, just rest and get well. You did a great job today. With that, the detective left, leaving Izuku with All Might, Recovery Girl, and the still slumbering Eri attached to his arm. He's right, you know, All Might said suddenly, getting Izuku's attention. The symbol of peace grinned. You did a great job protecting Eri today. There isn't a single scratch on her. Izuku looked down at the sleeping girl and smiled at her gently. Good. Given the circumstances, you class will have next Monday off, All Might went on. Enjoy the 3-day weekend while it lasts. You won't have many of them. Stay at home, recover, settle down with your mother and Eri. They're both worried about you. In fact, your mother should be here any second, so I should beat it before she sees my true form. Izuku mirrored the humorous grin All Might flashed him. Yes sir. See you later All Might. I'll text you tomorrow, All Might promised, then left the infirmary. The Recovery Girl sighed, but she was smiling. What a bunch of knuckleheads I'm taking care of. Ah, well. Since you're awake, I'll go ahead and give you your last bit of treatment. It'll fix up those minor burns you've got and repair whatever damage is left to your collarbone, but it'll tire you out. Go home after that and get a good night's sleep. Yes ma'am. Tomohiro walked out of Kurogiri's warp gate and into the empty bar that they used as a base, shaking his slightly burnt hand with some annoyance. As soon as both of the villains had entered the bar, they faced a computer screen next to the wall. Well, how'd it go? From the computer's speakers asked a deep calm voice. All Might wasn't there for a while, Tomohiro muttered in irritation. He only showed up at the end, so we didn't get to fight him. Those kids were annoying, though. All the fodder we brought with us ended up being dead weight. What about the superhuman your teacher and I engineered to defeat All Might? Where is Namu? A second voice queried. Kurogiri's gaseous form condensed so he could fit into a butler's suit. My apologies, he was burnt to the point that his super regeneration could no longer heal the damage he took. He's likely still alive, but he's been heavily crippled. The police certainly have him by now. What a waste, we went through so much effort to make him a physical match for All Might, too. It can't be helped. But if I might ask, who defeated Namu? The only man I'm aware of that is capable of defeating him with fire is the number 2 hero. Did Endeavor make a surprise visit? No, Tomohiro grinned behind his covered face. It was a kid, teacher, I wanted to catch him, but he got a critical hit on Namu. You let Namu get defeated to try and take some brat hostage. Settle down, doctor, the first voice said reassuringly. His tone, for he was undoubtedly male, became interested. This is unusual. You look excited, Tomohiro. Did something good happen? Teacher, you told me about a pet you had once. The one with green fire who fought All Might and destroyed a whole city. Tomohiro was practically shivering with excitement. That brat who took out Namu had the same quirk. Silence filled the room for several moments before the first voice spoke again, this time with a great deal of interest behind each and every word. Is this true? Kurogiri nodded. I believe he's right. It was a far cry from the quirk that challenged All Might, but it was without doubt of a near-identical nature. Sir, it couldn't be. It's possible. That's all that matters right now. I'll look into this. You did well today, Tomohiro. You've learned something valuable. I want him, teacher. Tomohiro clenched one of his hands as though trying to grasp something. I want a pet with green fire, like you did. And you will have him. For now, let's gather a new group of individuals handpicked for efficiency. There's no need to rush, the best plans take time and patience. All Might will deteriorate over time. Perhaps today's failure was fate telling us not to face him yet. It makes no difference. It will be that much easier to kill him next time. Tomohiro Shigaraki, next time, show the world the true horror of your being. Inko Midoriya was in the kitchen, cutting up some vegetables to make into a soup for Izuku and Eri in the other room. She was glad that they were okay after yesterday's attack on Yue. She just about had a heart attack when the call came from the school nurse that Izuku had been hurt and needed her to come pick him up. For goodness sake, she had just been there that morning. She didn't blame the school for what had happened. From what the news reports were saying, it had been a carefully laid out attack with a rare warping quirk that no alarm system would catch. Izuku had also told her that 2 of his teachers had been seriously hurt trying to protect them, and All Might had shown up not long after to save the day. She was upset that Izuku had been hurt, but at least the damage was already healed, thanks to Recovery Girl. The plump woman added the vegetables into a pot and began stirring them in the boiling water. Izuku had told her about what happened to make him get injured like that. She wasn't upset with him for risking his life to protect Eri, but she did worry about him. The thought of the small girl made her smile somewhat. Since the attack ended, Eri was even more clingy with Izuku than before. Inko wasn't sure she'd seen them separate since she picked them up, except to use the bathroom and take showers. It worried her that Eri might be getting too attached to Izuku. If the day came when Eri had to go into foster care, she dreaded that the girl might fight it, so that she could stay with Izuku. She shook her head. There was nothing to be done about it for now. The investigation into Eri's kidnappers was still ongoing, and all they could do was make sure she was safe and happy. Inko didn't mind Eri staying with them. Honestly, she was growing quite fond of her. Inko's train of thought ended as the front door was opened, and she peered around the hallway to see who was coming into the house. Katsuki had let himself in again without knocking, as usual. Hey Ms. Inko. Hello Katsuki. Come to see Izuku Endo. Inko blinked as she noticed a group of teenagers behind Katsuki. Hello. Katsuki, who are your friends? They aren't my friends, Katsuki growled, looking over his shoulder at his classmates in annoyance. They're just scrubs in the same class as Deku and I. Kyoka's eyelid twitched at him. Gee, thanks for the first impression, Katsuki. Oh, you're all Izuku's classmates. Inko realized, surprised. I had no idea you were all coming. I thought it was just Katsuki. Katsuki shrugged. Sorry. I gave my number to the redhead, and before I knew it, he got the rest of these losers involved. Ichiro scratched the back of his head, smiling in embarrassment. Sorry, but everyone was so worried about Izuku that they wanted to see him. Katsuki said he was gonna visit, and I kind of got ahead of myself asking if everyone else wanted to come by too. He trailed off as Inko covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. Ichiro and the other students, minus Katsuki, of course, froze, afraid that they'd done something wrong. Oh, my baby has so many friends who care about him. Inko cried, wiping her eyes. Sarah's sweat dropped and leaned over to mutter into Katsuki's ear. Is this normal? Shut up, of course it's normal, Katsuki snapped back. I swear to God, the crying is hereditary. Inko quickly cleared her face of all tears and smiled brightly at the group of students. Come in. Izuku's in the living room. She quickly poked her head around the corner to tell her son about the new arrivals. Izuku, Katsuki's here. He brought a bunch of your friends, too. Katsuki led the way for the group of teenagers, which consisted of Kyoka, Ichiro, Sero, Achako, Mina, Denki, and Tenya. He walked into the living room and announced his presence like he always did. Yo, Deku. Let's kill some stuff. He trailed off and stopped dead, staring at the head poking out of a pile of blankets on the couch. The only parts visible of Izuku were his eyes and curly green hair, which looked even messier than normal. The rest of their classmates entered the living room and also stared at the image of their friend bundled up into what was basically a human-sized burrito. Izuku didn't actually emerge from the cocoon and just mumbled through the blankets. Hey guys, what are you all doing here? Denki smirked. It looked kind of funny. Thought we'd drop by and see how you were doing, but this isn't quite what we were expecting. You catch a cold or something? Something, Izuku replied. His head poked out a bit more until his whole face was visible. You sick? Kyoka asked, leaning away slightly. No, I'm just CC cold. Tenya chopped one of his hands towards the teen burrito. Izuku, the AC in your home is barely on. How are you cold? Cause I overdid things with my quirk yesterday, Izuku sighed. I can't use my flames at all. Eh? Achako exclaimed. You can't use your fire. Why not? Mina asked. The covery girl said it was because I overheated my body and pushed my flames beyond what I can handle. My quirk hasn't fully recovered from the heat overload, so it's taking time to go back to normal. That sucks, but why are you cold? Ichiro looked confused. It's not like you're using your flames all the time. Katsuki rolled his eyes and walked towards the TV and the various gaming devices neatly arranged beside it. Idiot. People with quirks that control temperature use them a lot without thinking, kind of like how we just breathe naturally. Deku's quirk can heat things up, right? His body probably produces a mild amount of heat depending on the outside temperature to keep him stable. Now he can't keep himself warm, so his body is colder than it normally is. Izuku smiled a bit with embarrassment. That's how it is. The pathetic lack of resistance to even mild cold aside, Katsuki went on, flashing a glare at Izuku over his shoulder as he crouched to look through some games. You gonna play or not? Izuku slowly extracted one of his hands from the blankets and pointed at the bundle over his stomach. I would, but Yuri's kind of asleep right here. Mina covered her mouth to hide the large smile spreading her lips. That's adorable. Whatever, Katsuki muttered. He finally decided on the GameCube and got everything plugged in before looking at the other students who were still standing up. What are you guys even doing? Get over here so I can beat you. Sero grinned. You asked for it. Ichiro cracked his knuckles. You're on. Surprisingly, Kyoka shrugged and took one of the 4 controllers. Sure, I'll have a go. Fine, I play winner, Denki declared. While they went about trying to decide which game to play, Tenya decided to sit down and watch with Denki, while Achako and Mina sat by the couch near Izuku. Mina threw a fist in the air towards the group of teens about to play, and gave a cheer. I'm here for support unless the game's good. Then I'm gonna beat you all. Achako held a finger to her lips. SHH. Guys, keep it down. Yuri's still asleep, remember? Katsuki glanced over his shoulder at the lump of blankets on Izuku's body and snickered. Yeah, we wouldn't want to wake up Daddy's little girl, would we? Izuku's face reddened. Katsuki. His embarrassment was cut short by a small movement on his chest, and Izuku looked down to see that Eri was peeking out from under the blankets at him. She was barely awake, and the sleepy expression on her face was precious. He sighed, smiling, and used the hand still buried under the blankets to smooth her hair a few times until she dozed off again. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-ifs coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination. Goodbye everyone.